Good morning, and I would like to call this meeting of the Basic Education Funding Commission to order. And Ms. Wilkin, would you please call the roll?
Argel, Delgado,
Here.
Fitterer,
Here.
Hughes, Isaacson,
Here.
Krug,
Here.
Miller, Ortitai, Phillips-Hill,
Here.
Rothman, Schweier, Sturla,
Here.
Topper, Warner, Williams.
Please note, I just received a message from Representative Ortitai. He is joining us virtually today. And thank you very much, Ms. Wilkin. I'm Kristen Phillips-Hill. I have the great honor of co-chairing the Basic Education Funding Commission alongside my fellow co-chair, Representative Mike Sturla from Lancaster County. Today is the 9th meeting of this commission since we started taking our meetings on the road to hear from stakeholders all across our Commonwealth. And before we begin, I'd like to turn it over to my co-chair, Representative Sturla, for some brief opening remarks.
Thanks. I just look forward to hearing the testimony. We've heard a lot of interesting factual information to this point, and we're in the process of trying to process all of that, so it'll be good to hear what we're going to hear today.
Thank you, Representative. And I'd also like to thank our host for today. We are here in Senator Greg Rothman's district. Senator Rothman, any opening remarks?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman, and Chairman Sturla. Welcome to the 34th Senate District in Cumberland County and Central Penn College, founded in 1881. It offers a unique post-high school degree, many degrees, a lot of workforce development, and non-traditional students. So thank you to Central Penn College, a real gem in my district, and thank you for hosting us. I'd also like to point out we're joined by one of my constituents, Barb Geiswhite, who has served for, I believe, 12 years on the school board, and before that, maybe 30 years as a school teacher, retired school teacher. She's only 51, but she started when she was very young. Barb has been a great resource to me, so I just wanted to point out that she's here in attendance. So thank you, Barb. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rothman. I would like to welcome our testifiers today. They have spent a considerable amount of time on their respective testimonies and also for their lending their experience to this commission and helping us accomplish our shared bipartisan goals. And our first panel today consists of Mr. Alex Halper of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, as well as Warren Hudak. He is of Hudak Company. Matthew, I have a note here that Matthew is joining us virtually. Is that? I don't see Matthew. Very good. Okay, gentlemen, before you begin, we would like to swear you in. If you could please rise, raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And if so, please affirm by saying, I do. I do. Thank you. And please proceed when you are ready.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, members of the Commission. My name is Alex Halper. I'm the Vice President for Government Affairs at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The PA Chamber is the largest broad-based business advocacy association in Pennsylvania. We have about 10,000 members. These are employers in all 67 counties of Pennsylvania, companies of all sizes, and really crossing all industry sectors. And on behalf of our members, I want to thank you again for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. Our members are a diverse group of employers and people, and therefore their views on a topic like education is equally diverse. But I'd like to speak today, and I did submit my testimony for the record, so just to kind of give a kind of a high-level overview. I want to speak to three themes that I think are common when talking to employers about about education, about the public education system in particular. First and foremost, and I'd say most importantly, is the recognition that today's students are tomorrow's business leaders, tomorrow's entrepreneurs and innovators and skilled workforce. So as an employer who is very likely today experiencing difficulty finding individuals to fill open positions, and a business that's interested in growing in Pennsylvania to find those qualified workers to fill those positions is a daunting challenge for many businesses around Pennsylvania. It's a challenge today, and the prospects going forward are no less daunting. So the recognition that students in school today really have to be prepared for their future, whether it's in higher education, additional training, and then ultimately in a good career-oriented job. That's critical for our members, but it's also, of course, critical for Pennsylvania's long-term economic future and our prospects for prosperity. When we think about how to best position Pennsylvania students for success, it comes down to a number of factors, as you all, as lawmakers, really steeped in education policy, know very well. It's having great teachers and ensuring that Pennsylvania's best teachers are the ones in front of our students. It's ensuring that we have rigorous standards and systems of accountability to ensure that Pennsylvania students are getting a good education and are prepared for the next stage of their lives. It's establishing systems, and of course it's probably more difficult in K-12 public education than it is perhaps somewhere like here at Central Penn College, but a system that is as nimble as possible to account for an evolving economy and preparing students for not just the industries and the jobs that exist today, but for the jobs of tomorrow. Employers also think about our school system and public education from the perspective as taxpayers, and funding for school is a critical part of a business's tax liability. Oftentimes, according to the IFO, about 41% of school property taxes are from rental and commercial properties. So, being paid in many cases by the business community. And Council on State Taxation estimates that about 36% of a Pennsylvania business's tax liability is paying property taxes. That's both school and municipal, but we of course know that school is the bulk of that. This is a significant cost for businesses. And it has funded, I think when you look nationally and compare Pennsylvania to the rest of the country, it has funded a system that ranks relatively high compared to the rest of the country. Pennsylvania's per pupil spending, when you consider all sources of funding, federal, state, and local, ranks about 11th in the country, 27% higher than the national average. And when you consider just the state funding, we're a little, I think, closer to the middle of the pack, but still above the national average. Employers invest heavily in the school system, as do other residents and Pennsylvanians, and certainly hope that there's a strong return on the investment. And you don't want to be crass when you're talking about students and children, but that's what it is. And I think too often, unfortunately, we find that students may not be adequately prepared for the next phase of their life, may not be prepared for the workplace or for higher education. Certainly we appreciate, and I know a lot of the discussion in your previous hearings focused on funding and the need for more funding. That is something, of course, as lawmakers will have to deliberate on from the employer perspective, and I'd say probably from many Pennsylvanians' perspective. The hope would be that as part of that discussion, and hopefully before there's discussion on expanding Pennsylvanians' tax liability, there's a very strategic and concerted effort to identify areas for potential cost savings and using existing dollars more effectively and more efficiently. Can school districts, and just kind of throwing out some concepts I know have been talked about, can school districts coordinate better to achieve economies of scale for their procurement and other services? We have 500 school districts. I know we've have talked for years and decades about consolidation. Does that produce savings? And is now the time, when big ideas are on the table, is now the time to consider those types of concepts? We look at something like school construction, and that's a major driver of costs. A number of years back, Ohio was in a similar position of trying to identify more funding for public education. They looked at school construction and made the decision that they were going to take a five-year pilot program where schools would be exempt from prevailing wage costs. They believed that it increased school district construction, and they found it did. They found over the course of 5 years, and this was back, I think, in the 90s, they estimated savings almost $500 million, so much that they decided going forward that school districts would be permanently exempt from prevailing wage. Look, I don't think that's the silver bullet to fixing, if there's a consensus that school district funding needs to be fixed, and obviously we have a court decision that says that, but if we're putting every idea on the table, I think that needs to be real, and we have one example from Ohio where they did that. I'd be remiss if I didn't, in talking about funding and wanting to increase funding without necessarily increasing taxes, I would be remiss if I didn't put in a plug for, I know we're not here to talk about policies beyond education, but good pro-growth policy that will attract businesses to come to Pennsylvania and expand the tax base. Senator Rothman is a sponsor of a bill to help startup companies. Pennsylvania is not performing well when it comes to business attraction. Senator Miller, in his capacity as Democratic chair of the Finance Committee, helped shepherd that bill through the Finance Committee unanimously. So if we want more to expand that tax base, we need good pro-growth policies to do that. So finally, the kind of third common theme we hear from employers, and really if you get the first two right, I think the third occurs organically. Employers want good schools in order to attract people to come to Pennsylvania. They know that quality of life is critical to attracting families, to attracting people to fill those open positions I talked about, and good quality schools is an important part of that equation. So again, I appreciate the invitation for the PA Chamber to be part of this discussion, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Halper, Mr. Hudak.
Good morning. My name is Warren Hudak. I own Hudak Company. It's a regional accounting firm. My firm services small business clients virtually in every sector of the economy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. One of our biggest issues here is our entry-level candidates are just not prepared for the workplace. Identifying, acquiring, retaining qualified employees has become increasingly difficult. We just recently posted a job posting, 40% above pre-pandemic levels, 218 applications received, not a single qualified applicant. That's crazy. Our clients in the trades are not getting any applicants at all. None, zero. You can't fix a car from home. Everybody wants to work from home, and everybody wants to make $150,000 right out of school. Where's that expectation coming from? One business owner in State College said after 40 years in business, he must hire 1.5 employees for every single position he has. Another business owner says that he has a 20-year-old college student who cannot calculate sales tax on $100. Applicant work histories reveal candidates frequently hopping from job to job to job. Recent graduates lack people skills, unwillingness to accept criticism or feedback, have difficulty adapting to new situations or environments, or a resistance to change. Where's this coming from? It's coming from the schools, right? Some education advocates would have you believe that these deficiencies in hard and soft skills are a result of funding inequality inherent in our school funding formula. That's not true. That's absolutely unequivocally not true. Local school districts such as Cumberland Valley and Harrisburg School District spend $12,500 and $16,500 per pupil, respectively. If funding alone were a measure of academic success, Harrisburg students surely would surpass Cumberland Valley students in statewide test scores, and we know that's not the case. Parochial schools in our area, with which I am familiar with, charge families, non-Catholic families, $12,000 per student. That's their real cost. Now, I know that there are public services that are giving to us, but the difference is about $4 million with a student base of 500 students. We don't consume, that school does not consume $4 million of state services. Where's the money going? If these parochial schools could turn out students who can think critically, who can write in cursive, who have good work habits and discipline, why can't we do that in the public school sector? Why does it take so much more? The average cost per pupil in Pennsylvania's public school is $20,000. The amount of funding or lack thereof is not the problem. When President John F. Kennedy challenged the nation to send a man to the moon, American schools rose to the challenge and produced a workforce arguably the best engineers, scientists, mathematicians, innovators, inventors the world has ever known. There is a disconnect between skills taught in high schools and those demanded by employers. Employers increasingly seek candidates with practical skills, such as critical thinking, problem solving, communication, and teamwork. Arguably, the kids that we're graduating are smart, but they can't do the job. Proficient readers can comprehend, apply reasoning, and apply to real-world circumstances. Emily Hanford, an education researcher and reporter, suggests that simply spending more money on education is not the solution to the reading problem. She explains that despite schools thinking they are teaching students to read, a big body of scientific research about reading and how students read shows that there are important skills that need to be, that kids need to learn to become good readers, not being just taught to recite things. 47% of our students who take the National Assessment Exam can read on a basic level. Only 1/3 can read on a proficient level. What's the difference? I'll tell you what the difference is. The difference is a proficient reader can read, comprehend, apply analytical reasoning, and apply it to real-world circumstances. 47% of our students cannot apply what they read to real-world circumstances. I cannot give written instructions to our employees. It's a shame. John F. Kennedy didn't just want to send a man to the moon. He believed that we all have our own destiny and that we all, as Americans, can choose our own destiny. What choices do these students have if they can't read? What choices do they have if they can't do simple arithmetic? This is insane. This is what we are given. These are the students that are applying for our jobs. It is frightening what we're doing to our children. New entrants to the workforce lack interpersonal skills to reason, disagree, find consensus with their professional colleagues. As employers, it's exhausting to have to constantly repeat instructions over and over again. My conversations here today should be a building conversation, not to have to repeat over and over again the same set of instructions. Entrants to the job market today are also overly reliant on computers. These workers are incapable of reasoning through a problem without significant assistance. We are introducing the computers way too soon in schools. There is no reason. We've been teaching math for thousands of years. There is no reason to have a laptop in the hands of a kindergartner. It is a recipe for disaster. Artificial intelligence only exacerbates this problem. Without critical thinking skills, how will these new workers know how to read on what's online is credible? It won't be easy. A local college local college here recently was evaluating software to determine if a paper was generated by AI. Do you know that they got 10 false positives? This is a huge, huge problem. Anyway, I'll just say, we've been handed a pile of, we've been handed a group of entry-level workers who are just not ready for work.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Turn to Senator Rothman for a question.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Hapler, specifically you, Halper, for reminding us where the actual money comes from. Oftentimes in Harrisburg, within the Capitol, people think that the money just does grow on trees. And so, you know, we talk about equity, but I appreciate you reminding us about taxpayer equity. How do we compare as a state in how we actually fund education compared to other states? The way we fund education, have you looked into that, local versus different forms of taxes and tax?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. We have looked at analyses statewide, and the U.S. Census Bureau does a pretty good job of analyzing school funding and the various sources. And for sure, there's every state has a combination of federal, state, and local. Again, Pennsylvania, in terms of state-specific funding, that is where, when the numbers are crunched, we appear to be a little bit closer to average or middle of the pack in per pupil spending, with figures that are slightly above the national average. But when you consider all three, I think that's where Pennsylvania exceeds most states, and the most recent data, which I think is from 2021, ranks us at about the 11th highest amount of per pupil spending.
Do you have a preference how we tax? I mean, we're going to discuss it later today, but we fund the majority of it with property taxes. The majority of the local, obviously, is property taxes. Do you have a position on moving away from property taxes? And if so, what would you replace it with?
I can't say today that we like any particular tax. I think I probably speak on behalf of every person ever. But property taxes are certainly challenging, and employers are frustrated by them. But I think the reality from a school perspective is that property taxes, when you consider the other ways of taxing a business or an individual, whether it's income tax or sales tax or others, property tax at least is traditionally, historically more reliable. There are not the significant swings in or fluctuations in that type of income. So for the purpose of not harming business as little as possible, while also providing the stability that of course schools need when you think about the incredible task that they're asked to do, property taxes seems like it should be part of that overall equation.
Yeah. And Mr. Hudak, thank you for your testimony. And when I went to school, they taught us how to learn. I mean, they didn't. When you graduate, that wasn't it. You were being prepared for lifelong learning. So I have a 5-year-old who told me the other day, she's not smart, she just listens. That was pretty good. So thank you for your testimony. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Sturla?
Thank you. Mr. Halper, you talked about the fact that the portion of total tax burden related to property taxes for businesses is relatively high. And we know that as a state, we rely a lot on property taxes, more so than most other states. So we have a choice. We can either cut property taxes and cut funding for education, or we can reduce property taxes and increase some other tax to make up for the difference, or we can leave it where it's at and increase some other tax to make up for what the courts have said is a deficiency. Where would you come down on, I mean, you said you thought property taxes were a stabilizing force in education. So is the chamber in favor of at least ensuring that property taxes remain at some level so that there's some stability in the education system?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think I would reiterate my comment before, just looking, and this is really not on behalf of the PA Chamber, more just if you look at the data over the years, how property taxes have been a more stable form of revenue compared to other forms of taxes that have a tendency to fluctuate depending on economic forces and others. So that just seems to be what the numbers suggest. I probably today would not be in a position to suggest any tax increase that businesses would support. In fact, I think there are areas of our tax code where we are not competitive and should be looking to make Pennsylvania more competitive. Again, I do think it's a bit of a, and I know this is aspirational, but could be very real for lawmakers if the goal is to expand revenue, but others have the goal of not increasing taxes. We need more taxpayers. We just need more people in Pennsylvania. We need more businesses. The U.S. Department of Labor earlier this year put out a ranking of states based on net firm migration. How many businesses are moving out, offset by how many businesses are moving in. Pennsylvania ranked 46th in the country, the 5th worst state for companies coming or opening in Pennsylvania. That is a recipe for, as a Pennsylvanian, as a lifelong Pennsylvanian, that to me is crazy. But that is also a recipe for fiscal disaster if we don't right the ship, and that's about bringing more taxpayers here.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, did that study say it was because of high taxes, because of poor schools, because of lack of workers, because of lack of housing? Did it attribute anything to that, to why we were 46th?
I'd have to double check. I don't believe that particular study theorized any particular reasons.
Okay.
But the ones you just outlined, I'm sure would all be a part of it.
All right.
Yeah.
So going along that same line of thought, you talked about, and I believe there's other testifiers today that will talk about the fact that we're the 11th highest in per pupil spending. Now, when I look at state by state, or within the state, I can look at districts that spend more per student and actually get better outcomes. Now, there are some outliers, but in general, the schools that spend more per student, when you weight those students accordingly, like you can't say, well, you have a special needs student over here and you're spending more on them than a kid who doesn't have special needs, so see, that kid's not learning as much over here, even though you're spending more on them. But on average, when you look at the same kids in two different schools that are matched in terms of their capabilities to start with, the ones that spend more get a better outcome than the ones that spend less. When you say we're the 11th highest in per pupil spending in the nation, how does that compare to, so say if New Mexico has 100,000 students and they say we're only spending $10,000 per student because we don't care. That's a state that has low spending. Pennsylvania says we're going to spend $15,000 per student. And you go, oh my gosh, that's 1.5 times as much. Are we getting a better result? So the per pupil spending compared to results, how do we rank? Because that's what I really care about.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if we're spending the most of anybody in the world and we're getting a better outcome, I'm okay with that. I mean, I'd like to spend less and get a better outcome, but if every time I spend less, I get a worse outcome, I don't want to be last in terms of total spending because I'm going to be last in terms of total or better outcome. Is there anything that shows that differential? Because just looking at the raw number, New Mexico or North Dakota spends less than we do. If they spend $10,000 and we spend $20,000, the average is still $15,000 per state, and we're higher than the average. that doesn't mean anything to me, because I got a bunch of people in North Dakota that aren't learning anything. So I want to know what the outcomes are. Do you know of any study that shows spending per pupil on outcome and the total number of students versus, I got 10 students over here, can you cite any studies that show that?
And it's a great question, and the point about the per pupil spending, is from my standpoint more in the context of the investment that the business community, but all Pennsylvanians are making into Pennsylvania students. There are lots of ways of measuring outcomes, and I appreciate you bringing that up because at the end of the day, outcomes are far more important than inputs if you're measuring success. We cite in our testimony from the National Assessment of Educational Progress some numbers we've seen. It does not, and students at different stages in their educational journey, whether it's math or reading, it is a mixed bag. We cite for 4th and 8th graders with math and reading, Pennsylvania's average at best, and the outlook is not very positive. Pennsylvania should be, we should be leading the nation, I would hope, in outcomes. But whether it's proficiency or outcomes on statewide or national assessments, you can look at graduation rates or dropout rates, et cetera. Pennsylvania, everything I've seen is Pennsylvania kind of average, and average I don't think is good enough. But I think your question is spot on. If there's if it's crystal clear that more funding always equals better outcomes, then we know what we have to do, and we would argue let's look creatively about how we drive more dollars into education, into students and learning. But from the analyses that I've seen, it's far more complicated than that.
Okay. And one final comment, if I could. Mr. Hudak, you looked at Cumberland Valley and Harrisburg School District and said, gee, one spends $16,000 per pupil and the other spends $12,500 per pupil. But I will tell you from looking at the data that Harrisburg School District has a much higher percentage of students with special needs. Harrisburg area has a much higher percentage of students living in extreme poverty. Harrisburg area has a much higher percentage of students that experience childhood trauma. Harrisburg area has a much, I can go on and on with the statistics. And so when you look at those and weight them the way we do in the funding formula, Harrisburg area school district is woefully underfunded on a per pupil basis. And what I'll say is you then point out that there are parochial schools that only spend $12,000 per pupil. Those schools, when a kid acts up, they don't say, okay, we got to figure out how to educate this kid. They expel the kid. When a kid has special needs, they don't admit him in the first place. When a kid has, all the other things that we pay for, they don't get. So we have to look at what we're spending money on and which students we're spending it on, not just what the total is at the end.
Of course. So part of the problem isn't just what they know. Good work habits and discipline. I don't care if you're a special needs kid, and we have friends that are special needs, and they're delighted to have a job, and they understand good work habits and discipline. I sponsored a program in Harrisburg School District, okay? And I scheduled a team of volunteers to come in at different times to meet with students on a Friday. And all day long, I'm getting calls from our volunteers. Where are the kids? Where are the kids? Where are the kids? I called the principal. I said, what's going on here? Is there a school trip I missed? She says, we were confused why you would schedule this on a Friday. The kids liked to get a head start on their weekend. I don't care if you're poor, impoverished, or whatever. Where are the standards in Harrisburg School District? The problem isn't the money. The problem isn't the money. Where were they that Friday? And why did I have my business owners take off work on a Friday to do a good work in the schools, and the kids didn't show up because they wanted to get a start? So let's start there. Good work habits and discipline, okay? We're not just talking, it doesn't take money to make a kid come in on a Friday, okay? Where are the standards? Let's be clear about this. There are reasons why Harrisburg School District has their problems, and it isn't the money. NFIB just ran a poll. It's a well-respected poll for 50 years. The number 2 problem, aside from inflation, is what? qualified workers, which was supplanted by not finding anybody. My 218 applicants, why aren't they qualified? Why aren't they ready for a job? It's not about the money. My business owners who volunteered their time on that Friday might as well have just stayed home in bed, okay? We're coming up to the plate with our dollars. We're coming up to the plate with our time. We're taking these kids who aren't ready for real world, and we have to use our own money to re-educate them. That's not fair. Stop talking about money. Everybody should be able to map their own destiny. These kids have no destiny. They can't dream big dreams, and it's our fault. And it starts with that Friday. That Friday, there were no kids in school. The principal actually told me, we were confused why you would do this on a Friday. Are you kidding me? I'd like to take off every Friday, too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I have been remiss. I should have noted that we have been joined by the good gentleman from Philadelphia, Senator Hughes, virtually. He arrived just after roll was called. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Senator Miller.
Thank you very much. Mr. Halper, just one quick question on in your written testimony in talking in terms of workforce pipeline. We've met with a ton of different private industry partners in the Lehigh Valley, which I represent, and you heard a lot about the workforce shortages, and specifically programs that prepare our students for those robotics or plastic engineering, a ton of different hands-on type programs, the importance of investing in CTE. Just your overall thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. And I know I'm here representing statewide Pennsylvania businesses, but being a native of Allentown and a proud graduate of the Allentown School District, I appreciate the perspective you bring from the Lehigh Valley. I completely agree with the premise of your question, and noted in my testimony that we are asking a lot of schools and teachers and administrators. We do believe that statewide assessments and sort of ensuring that students at least have a basic fundamental knowledge is critically important, and both for the students as well as for systems of accountability. But we also want schools that can adapt and be reflective of what employers need. And of course, I speak on behalf of employers who want more people to hire. But students also want to be able to set themselves up for a good job, a good career-oriented job. Love if it was in their communities and certainly in Pennsylvania. So when we think about the types of positions, the types of industries that we expect to be hiring today, but also in the next 5 to 10 years, a lot of those will require career and technical training. So those types of investments make sense. Policies that encourage coordination between schools and the private sector ought to be encouraged. The legislature passed a couple sessions ago legislation that really provided and required better coordination. Schools that have school fairs, you really ought to have the trades in there talking about the opportunities that they provide. There are states that we've seen do a better job of recruiting career and tech instructors to their states, and it might be a licensing issue. If you were a career and tech educator in Ohio and you move to Pennsylvania and you want to continue your career there, we need to make it as quick and easy as possible for you to get started in a Pennsylvania school. So really, it's a lot of little things. There's no silver bullet to any of these challenges, but instilling in our administrators and schools a culture of coordination with the private sector and how do we better prepare these students. And that's on businesses as well. When a school calls and says, we're doing an assembly, can you send someone? Or do you have any equipment? If you're looking to make an upgrade and you want to, do you have equipment that you could donate to our, career and tech center? Business needs to pick up that phone immediately and say yes and do whatever they can. So it definitely goes both ways.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Turning next to Representative Topper.
Thank you. Mr. Halper, let's discuss a little bit about kind of the relationship, because we're looking, as we look at the formula and recommendations that we're going to have to make, demographics certainly is a big part of it. You know, what areas are growing, what areas are declining, what does that do to a student population, what does that do to a tax base, and then how do we address that from the state level? So in terms of areas, it's been my experience, I've not like to use the word failing schools. I prefer schools in crisis, because I think that's what more of it is, as opposed to a failure, because there's a lot of things that go into it. And when I see schools in crisis, I tend to see communities in crisis first. And so from a chamber's perspective, what is it like when we're recruiting businesses to Pennsylvania, or because I assume you guys are somewhat on the front line of seeing that. When we talk about education and how that relates, or other factors that surround what a community in crisis could look like, whether it's some of mine that are in poor rural Appalachia, what are we seeing from employers or potential employers that would look to come into Pennsylvania in terms of where they're looking in the state? What are certain things that rank very high on their scale as to why they'll select one or the other?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's a good one and a complicated one, and one that really varies depending on the business and the industry. You know, I think businesses are looking for state government that is interested in partnering with them and is coordinating. And I will give a lot of credit to the new to Governor Shapiro's administration for a lot of what he's talked about early in his administration in terms of state agencies looking to serve as partners with businesses in order to attract. So it's not a business that is jumping from agency to agency and department to department with different permits and different licensing requirements. More of the one-stop shop concept could work if it's done correctly. Pad-ready sites, a favorable tax climate, favorable workforce and litigation climate. It is a long list, and Pennsylvania has.
And what about the educational opportunities? I assume that also is something that is also a part of our economic development. You know, I see it in areas like mine, accessibility, programs that are being offered at whether a school is small and rural or not.
Yeah, 100%. I think employers want a good quality education system, and that's both K-12 and higher ed that is preparing students to meet the workforce needs. But as I said in the opening, also looking for quality schools because they're trying to attract families to Pennsylvania. And when you consider quality of life and what makes a community or a state attractive, it's having good schools where people want to send their kids.
Right now, CTC, the Career and Tech Centers and Career and Tech Ed, is funded mostly through school districts kind of forming a co-op or something to provide that. Should we see more state dollars infused directly into career and tech opportunities, in your opinion?
I think for those schools that are doing it well, I would say yes. Additional funding, I think, should come with pretty specific measures of effectiveness and accountability, and ensuring those investments are being made in a strategic, thoughtful way. But in the full range of areas to invest, anything that will expand the workforce for what employers need, I think makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Turning next to Senator Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just briefly note that the Commonwealth Court specifically said that success of our students is about money, and that the per student censure figures are misleading. But turning to my questions, Mr. Halper, do your members undertake multi-year financial planning?
Generally, yes, I would think so.
It's a responsible thing
Of
to
course,
do as
yes.
a business owner.
Yes, Senator.
How do your members plan for unanticipated or emergency business costs?
varies significantly, and sometimes they plan better than other times, but it's trying to be as nimble as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are your members dealing with inflation?
Yes.
How so?
To what extent, or how are they dealing
Just-
with it?
Just give me a little color.
Yeah, I mean, costs are increasing for many industries, and when that happens, it's frequently that the costs on your customers are increasing as well. So it's not, it would be very simple to simply raise costs and be able to absorb those inflationary pressures by putting it on your customers, but that's simply not how it works. So businesses are forced oftentimes to really dig very deep into their budgets. How are they using their existing dollars and making adjustments? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I would say that that's what our school districts are doing. They are undertaking multi-year planning, trying to anticipate changing standards from the state. They are trying to anticipate state not passing a budget in time, trying to anticipate increases in special education costs and charter school costs that have gone unchecked and unfunded. I would also note that your testimony talked about quote-unquote historic increases in basic ed, but the court noted when adjusted for, quote, and this is a quote, when adjusted for inflation, increases in BEF since 2014, 2015 have been modest. We had another testifier, Pasbo, testify that updated figures, that the quote-unquote historic increases have barely kept up with inflation. So I just note that for, if your members are dealing with inflation, so are our school districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. If I could, Mr. Halper, your testimony quoted Judge Jubileer, and she said in her ruling that, and I quote, "Nothing in the foregoing opinion undermines the ability of the General Assembly to continue providing local control to boards or infringe on any of the sister branches of government's authority, nor does it require reform to be entirely financial." I know you mentioned eliminating prevailing wage on school construction projects, and that could save approximately $500 million. When was that number noted? And do you have any updated numbers from Ohio and the savings they've been able to glean from that move?
The Ohio pilot program, and I appreciate the question. That was undertaken, I believe, back in the 90s, and if you kind of account for inflation in those figures, I think they estimate you're talking about $850 million or so. I'm not aware, and I have not seen any similar analysis in Pennsylvania on potential savings. Pennsylvania's larger, somewhat comparable to Ohio in terms of population, but larger, significant construction costs, and so I think it is fair to say that savings could be substantial.
So do you have any other suggestions that you believe could improve our system of education that would result in efficiencies, maybe not financial, but just any type of efficiencies in operations or services, anything that you could think of? From a business perspective, we could encourage the adoption of by our districts?
Well, I think it might be looking at school districts that are already doing things well and making it easier to replicate those best practices statewide. So we talked about school districts coordinating more closely in order to achieve economies of scale. If you're a school district and you have certain procurement, you are a major buyer of goods. The extent to which school districts can sort of better coordinate in order to kind of maximize costs and savings. That again, one small example. And I should note this prevailing wage is really just one example, not only of a potential area of cost savings, but of a state kind of thinking creatively and differently about, not necessarily how do we reduce funding, but how do we ensure that the dollars that are invested are really focused on students and teaching and outcomes. So again, I don't mean to suggest that we don't have schools and school districts that today aren't thinking creatively and really digging deep into their budgets and individual line items in order to balance their budgets every year. And what Senator Williams talking about a challenging and dynamic set of circumstances with fluctuating revenue and late, if a budget comes in late, there's a lot of strain on school districts, but we need to make it as easy as possible for these schools to save money, whether it's looking at mandates or other ways to increase coordination. We want to be giving them the tools they need and have asked for to utilize existing funding as best as possible.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more on that. One thing you noted in your testimony and your suggestion that school districts should implement merit pay for high-performing teachers. Can you talk about why the Chamber believes merit pay is important?
We look at incentives for anyone, and part of it is going to be financial. And if our goal, if we know that students are best served by having the best, most effective teachers in front of them, part of that encouragement is by financially incentivizing, Pennsylvanians to both get into teaching careers, but also incentivizing the best outcomes. Now, of course, that has to be done in a very thoughtful, careful way. We know that there are many variables that impact, that impact how students perform. I went to school, again, speaking personally, went to school with a lot of students who did not have a home life and had a lot of personal circumstances that made it very difficult, I think, compared to some of their classmates, myself included, to perform well. But we can't have a system that writes those kids off or believe like they aren't capable of annual growth as well every year. So that again is one example of a way I believe we can improve outcomes and really coming down to how teachers are incentivized and pushing for the best outcomes possible.
Thank you. Mr. Hudak, I have to tell you, when our daughter went to college, I sat down with that bill of what that semester cost and did the number of hours and said to her, if you skip class, this is how much money you are wasting. So if I find out that you're not going to class, because we provided a lot of financial assistance to our kids to go to school, I'm going to ask for this back. I said, this is a significant investment that we are making in your future. And we're taking it seriously. We expect you to take it seriously too. So truancy is an issue, I think. I look out here. I have a superintendent from my district here. I have a school board director from my district here. I think we all want our kids in school because, we've got a lot of taxpayer groups here. They're not in school. They're wasting our money. We're paying to heat buildings and pay educators and do all these things. They need to be there. Now, look, we understand there are mitigating circumstances. We all get the flu every once in a while, right? We need to stay home. But I appreciate your passion, your desire for our children to be as well educated as possible, and always your desire for financial accountability for those taxpayer dollars. And I think you're right. We need to make sure that we empower parents, educators, to make sure that our students are in their seats. So thank you for your commitment and passion for that.
I'd like to add one thing. Harrisburg School District, some years ago, I was in the administration building with a small group of people organizing a major literacy initiative. Dr. Cohen, who was the superintendent at the time, came in giddy as a schoolboy. And we're saying, Dr. Cohen, why are you so happy? He says, we just contracted with a dental organization to fix our kids' teeth. Where are the guardrails on these schools? What is a school? Why are they fixing teeth? They're running a dental office? Are you kidding me? It dilutes our ability to educate kids when schools venture into other areas. We find that in business all the time when organizations venture beyond the scope of what they do. Where are the guardrails? Why are we letting these schools do just about anything with the money? How dare they run a dental office? There's other programs for that. You can't stick your hand in our pockets every 6 ways to Sunday. There's already social programs for this. The schools are too busy trying to teach. What are they doing this? This is crazy. Where are the guardrails? What's the definition of a school? I can't figure it out.
Thank you very much. Turn to
Thank you. Thank you for that segue into that. Because our schools are trying to deal with what society is. You may not like it, but it's what it is. And it is a society where the roles of schools have changed. And it is our job to make sure that all the children have access to education. The disinvestments that we have made in the education system here in Pennsylvania has come home to roost in the court decision that we got. I am from Philadelphia County, and we are taking care of children with regard to community schools, because sometimes the only dental access or prescription or medical access they have is what they get at school. Our teachers, yes, probably should think about a little bit more merit pay, but you want to know what? We have collective bargaining agreements that we have to deal with also, and the districts have to stay within the confines. But our teachers have been stepped up into roles that, unfortunately, in our society, we have parents that are not around, or other ills of society, the traumas that happen today perhaps were not happening when I was going to school. But we certainly need to make sure, because I agree with you, Mr. Halper, that we need to invest in ourselves here in Pennsylvania. I think that what's happened in the school districts and the education system is because we haven't had an investment in ourselves here in Pennsylvania, not just in education, but in business and creating an environment so that we can bring more employers here. But I also don't think that our lack of investment in building our schools and all the construction that, whether it's Cumberland Valley or Philadelphia School District needs to get, we do not need to suspend things such as prevailing wage where people would make less money in doing their trade that they are trained in. So I'm sorry, some of the comments that were made, I wanted to make sure that you understood that I understand where your frustration comes in, but we are where we are in society and we need to fund it. Thank you very much for the time, Chairwoman.
Thank you, Representative. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for your testimony here today. Very much appreciate it. And I would like to call up our next testifier, Mr. Nathan Benefield with the Commonwealth Foundation. Very good. And before you sit down, if we could please swear you in, if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And if so, please affirm by saying, I do. I do. Thank you. And you may begin your testimony when you're ready.
The opportunity to speak this morning. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit just about the basic education funding formula itself, the components of it first, mention some of the adjustments that have been made to the formula over time, dig into a little bit how much funding is actually run through that formula and some of the issues that are there. Perhaps make a few comments on education funding overall. I know that's been the hot topic of the questions this morning. And then offer some ideas for potential solutions and ideas for fixing that. But going back, when the basic education funding formula was devised, I look back, it's almost 9 years now. Commonwealth Foundation had testified at that time in the first round of these hearings. A lot of what came out of that is very much in line with what our recommendations were of adopting weighted student funding, that it is funding based on student enrollment with adjustments or weights based on poverty, low income, adjustments for English language learners. Other states have had adjustments for special needs. Obviously, here we have a separate line item in the state budget for special education, though I'd say that is also plagued by some of the same problems we have in the basic education funding line item. And we looked at states, Hawaii, Florida, and Rhode Island as some of the models, kind of a diverse array of states there. What came out, generally I think is in line with our recommendations. I have a few quibbles of things that we'll touch on. We do have adjustments for poverty. In fact, 3 different adjustments in the formula for students who are in poverty, students who are in acute poverty, which is a lower income bracket, and then concentrated poverty, meaning if a large group of the students, or most of the students are in fact in poverty, there's even a greater weight in that. An adjustment for English language learners, and then district level adjustments for the income level of the district. Those are all good and good principles of what should be in that funding formula. 2 areas that I do have concerns and don't think are necessary to be included in the formula. One is there's a charter school adjustment. I don't think this is well recognized or talked about, but basically schools get more funding when a student leaves for charter school, even when charter schools in fact get about 75 cents on the dollar of what follows a student from a district school to a charter school, but there is a weight for charter school add-on, a 20% increase or 20% markup, meaning that a student that goes to a charter school is weighted 20% more than a student who's actually educated in the district school. That doesn't seem necessary, and certainly actually would incentivize sending more kids to charter schools because the district would get more. Whether you keep that or not, I think it is important to recognize that the current basic education funding formula does give school districts more money the more students they have that are enrolled in charter school, and recognize that fact. The other quibble I have with the formula is the district level adjustment for local effort capacity. I think this is intended to help lower income districts, but again, there already is an adjustment for household income. What this multiplier creates is actually an incentive for districts to raise taxes. You get more money through the basic ed formula if you have a higher tax rate, higher tax capacity. That's a perverse incentive on some of our districts there to include that. I would stick to the weights that are for wealth, income, poverty, and not necessarily the tax effort. In terms of the adjustments to the formula, obviously when this was passed, there was the recommendation of here's the formula adopted into law, and the law was intended as, all right, we're going to have a baseline, we're going to freeze the 2014-15 level and run everything else through the formula. But unfortunately, there have been some political manipulations of that, usually in legislative language of, there's going to be an extra $2 million for a district of the 3rd class and a county of the 3rd class with a student enrollment of 11,000 students to drive money to specific school districts. That's been done several times. You also have the level up funding that is driven out to 100 districts and then counted into the baseline. And while those formulas, those additions may seem good at the time and may seem necessary to help certain districts that are in need, I will note that by adding them into that baseline, that makes those increases permanent, and those adjustments permanent. And it may seem like, hey, it's a great idea in 2015 to give more money to Pittsburgh. It may seem like a good idea in 2023 to give $100 million to the poorest districts in the state. Will that still seem like a good idea to have that in the baseline in 2040? That is a question. That is one of the issues that has happened over the last several decades in terms of keeping the hold harmless principle in place. And that's where I want to go next in terms of how much is pushed through the basic ed funding formula. And I think that is one of the biggest issues and then probably the biggest challenges you guys as this commission will face of how to increase that. The idea being that over time we want more and more money to flow through the fair funding formula, have it based on student weights. That is what is more fair. But even now, almost 10 years into this, almost 75% of the money is still in the baseline or the hold harmless. That's true in basic education, true in special education funding as well. I find it even more problematic in the special education line item that 75% of the money for special education isn't even based on how many special education students the district has. That doesn't seem right to me. So moving to have more money funding through that formula, and I would point out that this is what creates a lot of the inequities. I put some charts in materials here that the revenue per student between growing and shrinking districts is one of the widest gaps around. The districts that have shrunk are in total spending about $25,000 per student, almost $4,000 more than the districts that are growing. And in terms of state revenue, it's almost double the amount. Districts that have been shrinking in population are getting, the 25 districts that have shrunk the most are getting about $12,000 per student in state revenue, whereas the districts that have been growing are getting about $5,000 per student. And this, drives a lot of the issues. I know that some of it came up in terms of property taxes. If you correlate the districts that have been shrinking and growing and the amount they're getting from the state with where our school property tax is the number one issue, the hottest issue, there's a clear correlation there. Growing districts are struggling with school property taxes much more than districts that have been shrinking in population, partly because of the hold harmless that shrinking districts have been getting more money from the state, haven't had to raise property taxes, and districts that have been growing have been struggling to keep up with that and finding more money from property taxes. And that's why on the whole property tax issue, you see a very clear regional divide between basically the eastern half of the state and the western half of the state on where they stand on that. And as you go even farther into the equity issues, like I mentioned, the shrinking versus growing gap is the widest. We did pull some numbers on, we're looking at the intent of the basic ed formula is to drive out more money to low-income districts, low-income students, and districts with higher poverty rate. There is still a gap in that amount that the wealthiest districts in the state are spending more overall than the poorest districts. That is, when you get into the basic ed formula, we are driving out more money to poor districts, but the more money that flows through the basic education funding formula rather than the hold harmless or the baseline component, the more it will help adjust for those inequities and adjust to drive out more money to poor districts, drive out more money to districts that have higher poverty rates, as well as districts that are growing in student population. So that is, I think, the most important consideration of how do we drive out more funding through the formula rather than other mechanisms. Given that, I wanted to make just a few comments on education funding in general. I know it was brought up earlier where Pennsylvania ranks among the highest spending states in the country. The number I had was seventh highest based on the latest census data. I think it is important to note that there have been significant increases over the past several years, almost every single year, a significant increase. I did lay some of that out in the testimony. I don't want to belabor that here, but I think it is important to recognize that we do spend higher than the national average, and it includes higher than the national average from the state level, but significantly higher from the local level. And that's one of the questions that have been raised earlier of how do we rank versus the rest of the nation. In terms of average property taxes, I just looked this up while we were asking this question, Representative Stilwell. Tax Information ranks us 11th in terms of the percentage of property value paid, and 25th in terms of the per capita property tax collected statewide. But again, I think that is a very there are very significant regional differences in that property tax burden of where Pennsylvania ranks. And we are one of the few states in the country that doesn't have any limit, any real limit on raising property taxes, doesn't have a meaningful referendum component. Ohio was mentioned earlier. I grew up in Ohio. My parents live there. They have to vote on school property taxes almost every other year, whether it's a new increase, a renewal, a levy for a building. I would say that they voted on school property taxes more than every single Pennsylvania school district combined, because of how often that happens. But that's a different model of capping, school property taxes, having stricter controls there at the local level than the state level. Another comment I wanted to make, and I think this is a crucial one, of looking at the enrollment trends in Pennsylvania. I know there's been talk of teacher shortages. I do think that is also a regional and localized issue of where it is toughest to hire teachers, and some of that is driven because of the problems in the funding formula, that districts that have been shrinking in population don't really see that they have a teacher shortage. They're able to maintain their teacher population, but those that are growing are having trouble finding and hiring teachers, and so that is certainly part of what is driving the teacher shortage. But important to note that we have in Pennsylvania is a student shortage. And over the last 2 decades, have about 139,000 fewer students enrolled in public schools currently since 2000. I did look up, the Department of Education does put out enrollment projections for the future. They have found, they're projecting that in the next 10 years, another enrollment decline of more than 101,000 students in Pennsylvania. And to put that in perspective of how much is 101,000 students, if you took the school districts of Pittsburgh, Reading, Allentown, Lancaster, York, and Erie and eliminated them, that's 101,000 students. That's the projected enrollment decline in the next decade. So clearly that is one of the biggest challenges facing school districts. I think it is one of the biggest challenges facing state lawmakers, and in terms of the funding formula of managing enrollment declines, how to distribute funding in a way that is fair for those areas that are growing and those that are shrinking in a way that is driving money to the students. And that was really the clear point of the education funding ruling, was not about necessarily the rights of districts or the rights of buildings, but the rights of students to get an adequate education, the rights of students to get fair funding. And that, I think, is the important consideration for this commission in terms of looking at the enrollment changes. And while it is not obviously the purpose of this commission, as lawmakers looking at the bigger picture, why has there been enrollment declines? It's because of a declining population, and particularly not only students, K-12 students, but working age adults, while we're shifting to an older population, which means a declining tax base while expenses, especially for senior services, is going up. That is the biggest challenge that's going to be facing you guys as lawmakers. Obviously not part of the Basic Education Funding Commission, but I think the greatest challenge facing this state is how do we deal with, or how do we reverse a declining working age population in Pennsylvania. So I want to talk about some policy ideas in terms of fixing these things. Obviously, the focus being transitioning more of the state funding to go through the fair funding formula. I think that is a key component. That is a driver of a lot of the policy issues that have been raised today in terms of taxes, in terms of equity and fairness, how we can do that. Obviously, there are concerns about getting rid of hold harmless entirely, looking to some sort of transition way of bringing that to some sort of transition period so that more money is flown through the formula and less through the hold harmless. I know that some states have had this kind of phase out. Indiana actually had a program, they called it a de-ghoster, which is kind of a weird phrase I learned recently, but basically, as students leave, they'd call them ghost students, and over 3 years, the funding would phase out, and they considered to pay for quote-unquote ghost students, but phase that out over time. I'd also consider looking at other line items in the state budget and even pulling them into the basic education funding formula. You could do this perhaps with transportation funding. I know there's a reimbursement line for transportation, but perhaps consider doing that through the fair funding formula. I'd also consider that for the pension reimbursement. And the current pension reimbursement is basically the state promises to pay at least 50% of the school district's pension costs, with higher weights for lower income, lower wealth districts. This comes to, doing quick math, the current pension reimbursement, or the current pension payment rate is 34%, meaning school districts have to contribute 34% of payroll to pay off pension costs. The state's contributing half of that. They're saying we're going to pay you at least 17% of your payroll in reimbursements. That is, not necessarily, and if your concern is equity in terms of the way the fair funding formula works versus the way the pension reimbursement works, I'd point out that some of the pension formula does benefit to some extent lower income districts, but it also benefits the richest districts and the highest salary districts. So statewide average, I did this on a per student level. What does the pension reimbursement line item come on a per student basis? Statewide, it's about $1,700 per student. In a district near here, West Shore District, basically a middle-class district, they're getting about $1,200 per student. Reading School District, one of the poorest, is getting about $1,700, right near the state average. Philadelphia is slightly higher than the state average, about $1,900 per student. Within our wealthiest districts, Lower Marion is getting more than $2,700 per student in the pension reimbursement line item. That is because their pension costs, which are paid to their salary costs, are among the highest in the state. So I would consider throwing those types of line items, instead of doing it piecemeal, putting it all through the basic education funding line item, which is more fair and more student-based. I'd also consider the policy of expanding open enrollment, breaking down some of the district lines, district barriers that we have in Pennsylvania. We are one of the few states in the country that criminalizes lying about your home address to get into a better school. There have been a number of cases where parents have put down an aunt's address or something to get into a different school district and been prosecuted for that. That shouldn't be the case. If there is space in a neighboring school district, they should take those students, and we shouldn't have, it was mentioned about the Harrisburg School District. If a student from Harrisburg wants to come over here to East Pennsboro and can transport their kids, they should be able to. That is something that would deal with a lot of the inequities that we've talked about. I'd also look at, and point out in some of the written documents that are presented, of looking at school district reserves, that there are, school districts have grown their reserves, but not equally. There are a lot of school districts that have very excessive amounts of reserves, and there are some school districts that have zero or negative reserves. The former auditor, Eugene D. Pasquale, said that if any school or entity has more than 20% of their budget in reserves, that's something to look at. About half of school districts fall into that category. So I think it would be important to look at whether there's a way for the state to recoup some of that excess reserve of any amount that is above 20%, bring that back in and distribute that in a more equitable way to districts. So that's some ideas, some thoughts, some data. I'm happy to take questions for now, questions for follow-up, or any additional information you'd like.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Representative Sturla for a question.
Thank you. I think when you were talking about pensions and how they get funded, I agree. I think there should be some reforms there. I thought the concept of Harrisburg being able to send a couple busloads of kids over to Cumberland Valley was quite interesting.
Good senator from Cumberland Valley is not
I think, well, he obviously left. He was so upset by that. But obviously, but I want to look at your chart on page 7 of your testimony, which deals with teacher ratios to students. So between the years of like 2007, 2008, all the way up to 2010, 11, the state of Pennsylvania led the nation in student performance. We were getting national awards for being top ranked for the advances that we had made with our students. There were twice as many teachers as there are in the schools today, and there were 3% less kids than there had been in the year 2000. Now in 2023, we have half the amount of teachers and there's only 10% less students. Do you think that, given the fact that we have a history in the state of Pennsylvania, when we do teacher ratios to students that are almost twice what our teachers are now, that might be a rational thing to say, boy, if we did that again, we might get the same kind of results?
I don't think, I mean, the number is quite drive to twice. I mean, the chart there is showing the growth versus the year 2000, not the total.
Okay, all right.
But it's certainly, there was a growth in the number of teachers in the early 2000s. There was a decline, especially after the stimulus funds ran out and school districts were struggling there. That was the period of layoffs at the teacher level.
And we saw
it's grown
immediate
since then.
drops in student performance.
Yeah, and one thing I'd say, I know you raised the question of where does Pennsylvania rank in terms of student performance. The numbers that I've seen, and I have to perhaps update this and look at this, but it is when you adjust, and you mentioned adjusting for demographics, somewhat, they're basically in the middle of the pack in terms of performance. And there are states that obviously have a much higher Hispanic population that are doing well when you factor those in, but are doing poorly overall because of the high Hispanic populations. And there's been, I know there's been studies like, well, Massachusetts is the highest performing state, but they also have the lowest percentage of low-income students, lowest percentage of Hispanic students. That weighs into the factors there. But the numbers I've seen is Pennsylvania is middle of the pack in terms of that performance when you weight based on demographics.
Okay, but going back to in my tenure in the legislature, in my lifetime, the 2007, 2008, 2009 era, when we were leading the nation in student performance, should we look to emulate what we were doing in those years?
I mean, I'd have to look back. I don't recall leading the nation factor, but I do think that
We had the most gains in student performance and we were top, number one.
I do think that when we were talking about this, and I think one of the key factors for this commission is getting teachers where they need to be, and that is, one of these. There's been studies that what is the most important factor for student learning. It is the quality of the teacher. That has clearly been one of the key factors. And in terms of talking about teacher shortage, there are shortages in areas where we probably need teachers, good quality teachers, the most. Right. Whereas, areas that can afford quality teachers don't necessarily need them as much. They're going to have good students. That is something I think to consider of how do we drive resources where they're most needed. And let's talk of merit pay in the previous panel. I'd also consider incentive pay for teachers in math and sciences where there's a shortage, teachers in areas that are hard to serve, that are hard to recruit teachers, and providing those types of incentives to recruit teachers where they're most needed and drive resources where they are needed.
Yeah, and look, I'm with you on that. Look, if I'm not an educator, but you can put me in some schools in the state of Pennsylvania, and those kids are still going to do okay, regardless of how bad I am. There are other schools where I want the best and the brightest teachers in that school, and they are the toughest kids to educate. And that's where if those schools are underfunded and paying less, that teacher's never going to go there, because as much as they may be dedicated to their profession, when they can make $120,000 down the road and teach kids that I can teach versus $70,000 or $50,000 teaching kids that I couldn't have a slightest snowball chance in where being able to educate, I know where they're going. Yeah. And in terms of particularly the STEM teachers, I have a daughter who's an engineer. She loves the thought of teaching. Every job she's ever had, she started a student program and all those kind of things. For her to leave her engineering job and go into teaching, she would need to cut her pay by 3/4. She's not going to do that with her young family. Yeah. She's not going to do that to them. We do have to solve that issue. There is no question in my mind about that. So thanks for your testimony today.
Yep.
Thank you, Senator. Turning to Representative Topper.
Mr. Benefield, you're a numbers guy. We're talking about a lot of numbers. Obviously, when you bring up demographics, that's a lot of my area. I'm definitely in the population. We talk about that the poor rural Appalachian area where we're seeing a sharp decline. in everybody, in just people in general. But we still have a lot of school districts. And, in my area, for instance, in my district, I don't have a parochial school. Basically the choices that my families have are the public schools that are there. And so I've been racking my brain as to how we can expand tax bases, how we can consolidate services. I'm sure everyone on this panel is tired of hearing me talk about integration. But it is a metric that I'm trying to look at, because you brought up the ramp, the Indiana, kind of the off-ramp to a better way. Since most of my districts are those hold harmless districts, I'm looking at how we can incentivize that off-ramp. What does that look like if we have, say, in southern Somerset County, where you have Salisbury, Turkey Foot, Shanksville, North Star, some of these shade, and the idea that perhaps they're already doing a lot of co-ops in a lot of different areas. What does it look like if tax bases are expanded so that they still keep their schools, but it's basically one district? Buildings maybe stay, mascots stay, as we still work through how to work that off-ramp down, but yet the tax base is expanded. In the Commonwealth Foundation's research, any kind of models there, anything that we could use to incentivize that as we look at this formula of transitioning away, or is that just not something that's practical?
No, I think there is some practical, and there was it's been a number of years now, but Legislative Budget and Finance Commission did a study on school district consolidation and where it makes sense. And what they found is, there's a lot of people say we've got too many school districts, we've got 500, look at other states, they've got, Maryland's got one per county. What they found is there's a sweet spot. Smaller districts tend to cost more per student. Bigger districts tend to spend more per student, and you just have a bureaucracy, but in that, there's kind of a middle ground range. This is like the right size for a school district in terms of number of students. It seems to be where the cost savings are, and then identified something like 200 some districts that would make sense for merger, just to share services. I think looking at that of, the ability to do that. I would say, while there is, a lot of political reasons why you don't want to close a school and shut down a mascot, that needs to be a realistic decision that's facing schools, because keeping a school open that is at 20, 30, 40% capacity doesn't make a lot of financial sense.
And a lot of what prevents schools are the upfront costs. So even if it's, you get past the whole mascot thing and community thing, which is not an easy thing to get past, but even if you get past that, they're looking at, those initial costs, or else also inheriting another school's pension liability, all of those things, is there, putting you on the spot a little bit, but do you see a way that state government can incentivize perhaps that as that off-ramp that we're looking for? Because whatever we do in terms of changes to a formula, if they are significant, now if we're tweaking the edges, it's one thing, but if any change is significant, we are looking at, even if a funding increase is significant, we're looking at least a 5-year ramp to get to wherever we're going. What should take place maybe during those 5 years?
Yeah, I need to probably think farther on what sort of incentives can be in place for districts to work together on that, because there often are challenges both in terms of cost and simply rivalries. Like, we don't like that district over there, we don't want to merge, we don't want to share services. So I'd have to think about how, both within the formula and perhaps other incentives to create some of those cost savings.
If there are folks, I know you guys, again, your numbers, you run a lot of numbers, those would be some that over the next few weeks I'd be interested in seeing, as again, we look for recommendations from this commission and also what we can do moving forward. So I really appreciate your time, your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Representative. Turning next to Representative Isaacson.
Good morning, how are you?
Good.
Good. I just want to touch base on also the hold harmless opinion you have. We've had testimony at previous hearings that most want to keep hold harmless in place for a variety of reasons. I'm, again, from Philadelphia County, as you know, and we have the not only our largest school district, but our second largest school district, which is the charter system in Philadelphia. And obviously, we're not shrinking in the sense of the amount of students, it's just where are they being educated. So removing hold harmless would obviously be something that's very concerning to them also. If you could address that with regard to.
Well, I mean, in terms of the Philadelphia and the charter situation, I do believe that getting rid of hold harmless actually benefit Philadelphia, and the formula, the weighted student formula, is based on what's called average daily membership. Average daily membership does include both those in district schools, but also those in charter schools. So that is part of the formula. So even as, I think in Philadelphia it's a third of the public school students are in charter schools, but that total is what is the average daily membership. So the average daily membership is about 180,000, 120,000 in district schools, 60,000 in charter schools. So it is considered part of the weights of the charter enrollment.
Right. It just, in your testimony, it seems to imply that you think we should be getting away from the hold harmless.
I do think we should, I do believe we should be getting rid of
I guess
hold
maybe
harmless.
the point I'm trying to make is that not every school district should get away from the hold harmless. There just may be some that need to be adjusted. So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions. I have a statement. I don't have questions because it's not the Commission's duty to relitigate the Commonwealth Court case. It's my duty to respond to a court order. Although it's clear, I believe your testimony is trying to relitigate the case. Commonwealth Foundation submitted multiple amicus briefs in the case, as did many others, cutting and pasting and copying many of the graphs that were presented here. The respondent lost that case and did not appeal. So I want to point out some examples of facts that were decided by the court. So page 1 of your testimony, Pennsylvania, quote, Pennsylvania ranks among the highest spending states on public education. The court, quote, specifically found that the census undercuts the total number of students for whom those funds are paid by leaving charter students out of its denomination, and found that data to be misleading. Also on page 1 of your testimony, Pennsylvania public school spending is growing. And that ignores inflation. As the chamber just testified, their members are also struggling with inflation, and the court, as I pointed out to the chamber, noted that, quote, when adjusted for inflation, increases in BEF since 2014-2015 have been modest, and that was updated with testimony that this commission has received from PASBO about the recent increases since the court decision, that it is still just barely keeping up with inflation. On page 2 of your testimony, quote, school districts' reserve funds are growing to excessive levels. As the chamber testified on the first panel, they said that their members also undertake multi-year planning as part of good financial planning. That is something our districts do. The court found, and I quote, fund balances are extremely important to enable the districts to continue operations when state and other funding is delayed or there are unexpected expenses. The court looked at what I pointed out to the chamber. They looked at national accounting standards, the need for stability, the state's frequent late budgets that the school districts have to plan for. And the court found, quote, based on the credited evidence presented, the court does not find district fund balance to contribute to funding inequities. On page, not sure what page, one of the pages of your testimony, it says school districts continue to hold federal funds. In reality, federal ESSER funds are done through reimbursement and should not all be sent to the school districts yet. Much of it is held by the state and is planned to be spent through September of 2024. The ESSER funds was being sent out during the testimony, And the court, in fact, heard testimony that school districts have spent those funds but have experienced significant delays in receiving those funds. One particular example was Lancaster was owed $13 million in state reimbursements for payments paid through ESSER. I will note that that has been experienced by some of my districts, like Pittsburgh Public Schools. They spent, and don't quote me on the dollar amount, it was multiple millions, I believe it was $5 million, on laptops. That was all a one-time outpouring of money, and they have been bits and pieces reimbursed from the state. And it is holding up their use of other ESSER funds because they don't have the fund balances to float that kind of cash. Also,
Senator,
excuse me.
no, Senator, I really appreciate, certainly the plaintiffs who testified twice used many of those same materials in their
That's fine.
presentations to us in Allentown and
And they
Harrisburg.
won the
And
decision.
you are correct about the ESSER funds. This is really supposed to be an opportunity for us to ask questions of the testifiers.
I think it's really interesting that you were interrupting me, and there have been many times on this commission where many people have talked. So I'm going to finish what I'm saying, and then we can
I
move on.
certainly would like us all to have the opportunity to speak and have
I am
worked very
almost done.
diligently.
I am almost
If you
done.
could, thank you.
I am almost done. There were also many, many times where the court disregarded or the court said that, made it plain that the requirement imposed by the Constitution is that every student receives a meaningful opportunity to succeed academically, socially, and civically, which requires that all students have access to a comprehensive, effective, and contemporary system of public education. Didn't talk about voucher programs such as EIT and OSTC, which the Commonwealth Foundation and its funders have benefited from, and Lifeline or PASS. So in conclusion, I do not find your testimony credible, and neither did the court. Thank you.
I will respond despite it not being a question.
Mr. Benefield, if you may, thank you to the gentlelady for finishing her comments. Mr. Benefield, if you would like to respond.
Yeah. On just a few comments, that the charts in my testimony are not inflation adjusted, but we do have inflation adjusted charts that I would happily provide this commission to see the change in spending in terms of inflation adjusted dollars. On the comment about reserves being excessive, I would say that that's not across the board in every school case having excessive reserves, but even according to the Auditor General, the Democratic Auditor General Eugene DePasquale, when schools are building up reserves over 20%, that is considered to be an excessive amount. I do think it is the job of the commission in terms of filling out the mandate from the court to come up with a solution. The court obviously did not mandate any solution, but left it to the legislature to be looking at all avenues, financial and non-financial, to address. And as the senator said, and I was glad she did not walk out of the room on me, as she has in the past, but I was very glad.
I didn't walk out on you.
You walked out on others of the Commonwealth Foundation.
The Commonwealth Foundation testimony was done. Closing remarks were happening, so you can lie all you want.
If I may, I think it's time for us to move on further. And if I would like an opportunity to ask you a question, but I would also like to state that during the initial meeting of this commission, when we took these hearings on the road, I indicated that we would hear things that we like, we would hear things that we don't like, we will hear things that we agree with, we will hear things that we don't agree with. I think what's important is that this commission stays focused on our shared bipartisan goal of meeting the statutory requirement under the law of evaluating our basic education funding formula. And that's what I would like us all to do here today and throughout the rest of this process. I would like to talk to you. You referenced Ohio as an example with regard to school property tax referendum votes. Our last panel, Mr. Halper, also referenced cost savings realized in Ohio by prevailing wage reforms with regard to public school construction projects. I have a sense. I don't have a crystal ball. I've often wished that I had one in this job. Where taxpayers in Southern York County would be on Act 1 referendum votes. I have a feeling I could probably guess where they would be on a regular basis. So my question to you is, do you see fewer property tax hikes in places like Ohio, where they have found cost savings and efficiencies with regard to how their public education dollars are spent?
You see fewer tax hikes, but not none. And I'd say that, we did some analysis, it's been a few years now, on states that have property tax referendum. Those referendums pass about 2/3 of the time. So they are on the ballot, but they are passed, but they do have to justify them. And I can give the example. This isn't anecdotal evidence, but again, in my parents' district, they were wanting to build a new middle school. They had originally put out a proposal for middle school, put it on the ballot for a tax referendum to pay for that. It was rejected. The school district came back and came up with a different plan that was less expensive. So they did build a new middle school, got that second one to pass, but they justified the cost and brought the cost down for the needs of the voters, basically. So that was an example of, here we have a proposal to spend money, brought it down because of the need to face a voter referendum on the tax to pay for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And as a avid Penn State football fan, I am loath to ever think that Ohio could do anything better than we do. So I thank you very much for your testimony here today. And with that, I would like to welcome our final panel today. It is our School Property Tax Working Group panel, and it consists of Mr. Bob Stilwell, former state representative Frank Ryan, and Mr. Robert Kistler. And gentlemen, I also, before you sit down, I need to note that during the last panel's testimony, we were joined by Senator Dave Argel. Senator Argel, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Senator. Just to note that I'm unavoidably required to be in Berks County today, which is one of those counties that I think cares more deeply about school property taxes than almost any other one in the state. Certainly, our mandate is to look at how school districts are funded. It is also part of that mandate to consider where those dollars come from. I think this next panel I'm very pleased that we were able to add them to the schedule to talk about the incredible unfairness of school property taxes, not just in Berks County, not just in York County, but across the state. And so I want to personally welcome them, and again to the chairs to thank them for allowing this edition. I think this is probably one of the most important panels that we're going to hear from. So my thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Gentlemen, if I could swear you in, please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And if so, please indicate by saying I do. I do. Thank you very much. Please begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Senator Phillips-Hill and Representative Stilwell, for inviting us to testify today. My name is Bob Stilwell. I'm a retired engineering and business development manager who enjoyed a career with a major Navy laboratory and then a second career with a major defense contractor. I now live in Adams County. I'm a community activist trying to bring common sense to school funding in Pennsylvania. We are not here to ask for more money from the general fund or the rainy day fund for schools, but to discuss how to provide revenue for schools another way. It is time to discuss the elephant in the room, school property taxes, and why and how to replace them with a system that generates more tax revenue thanks to good economic growth policies. The school property tax is probably, well, maybe definitely the most despised tax in Pennsylvania. It is a hugely regressive tax, not based at all on one's ability to pay. How much more regressive can a tax be than one that threatens to take your home if you can't pay it? Property taxes made sense in William Penn's day when virtually all wealth and income were derived from property ownership. But the value of my house has no relationship to my income, yet it is taxed as though we still live in the 18th century. This is insane, but we continue to do it anyway. Each of you no doubt sees in your local paper pages like this one, a facsimile fund from Adams County, that lists properties this year that have been seized for upset tax sales. I've seen papers from other counties that have 3, even 4 pages like this. This page has 244 properties listed. If Adams County is a representative average of the other 66 counties, then as many as 15,000 properties are put at risk of loss every year. Too many of those belong to families who, despite having paid off the mortgages on their homes, still owe allegiance to the school district for their yearly tax. Your home is never your own if the sheriff can seize it for unpaid property taxes. Pennsylvania boasts that it levies no tax on retirement income. Try telling that to any of your constituents living on Social Security who are in danger of losing their home because they can't pay the school tax from their retirement income. And according to the National Institute on Retirement Security, 40% of retired Americans rely solely on Social Security. I doubt Pennsylvania is any different. To make matters worse, school districts abuse their authority to tax. The Pennsylvania Auditor General recently released a report, January of this year, in which he audited 12 school districts from urban, suburban, and rural areas. They were chosen because each had asked for and received an Act 1 exemption, and yet they had significant reserve fund balances. Incredibly, he found that in every one of those school districts, money was hidden in order to raise taxes. The media announced the audit report under a headline, quote, "School districts tuck money in reserve accounts to justify the need for increases," audit finds. According to the Auditor General, it's not a stretch to say that it's happening across the Commonwealth. Indeed, in my written testimony submitted to you, I describe how it's being done in my own school district. But the school property tax prices are more complicated and more damaging than that. The Commonwealth Court, in its decision, recognized the urgency to repair it. To quote from the President Judge's decision, page 769, quote, "It is evident to the court that the current system of funding public education had disproportionately negatively impacted students who attend schools in low-wealth school districts. This disparity is the result of a funding system that is heavily dependent on local tax revenue, which benefits students in high-wealth districts. It is stunning just how huge that disparity is. According to the PDE's annual financial report, the percentage of property tax contribution to total school district funding ranges from 80% in Lower Merion School District to only 6% in Duquesne City School District. State funding provides most of the rest. What justification is there for taxpayers to be treated so unequally by the state? Such a level of disparity cannot be fixed. The school property tax system of funding schools is irretrievably broken, totally unfair to students and taxpayers alike, and must be replaced. Thank you for your time, and I applaud each of the commission members for their dedication in trying to fix this very difficult problem. I would ask you to now turn the floor over to former Representative Frank Ryan to discuss what replacement might mean.
Thank you so much. And as you can see by looking at us, I'd like the record to reflect that we were not here when Ben Franklin came up with the property tax system, despite what you might think, particularly with me. He was a predecessor, but he was a great guy. I knew his son. The One of the things that I'd like to just kind of preface my comments with is, first of all, thank you very much for Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill and Representative Stilwell and the entire commission for allowing us to be here. For those of you who have known me in my legislative capacity, I'd just like to give you a tiny bit of background, if I may. I am a teacher. I spent 10 years as an adjunct faculty member at Franklin and Marshall College. I was on the board of trustees of a postgraduate national security study university for a period of 5 years and chair of their audit committee. I'm an instructor for the American Institute of CPAs as one of their members on continuing professional education, and I spend a lot of time in the classroom. I say that, and by the way, additionally, I was on the PESER's Board of Trustees for 3 years. I mention that background because one of the things that happened as a result of this property tax elimination issue is as I was studying it when I became a legislator, and I became convinced it was absolutely impossible to fix. I had asked in August 2019 if the then policy committee chair would allow for a hearing on property taxes. We had it in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, and at that time I was going to make the announcement that I've studied it. It's such an archaic system, it can't possibly be repaired, and I was going to go into the private sector and continue to do what I do in my private sector, which is keep organizations out of bankruptcy, that I could then help the Commonwealth navigate its own financial distress, as Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill is well aware that we were involved in that process. I'd also planned on announcing my retirement at the time. However, at that meeting in August 2019, the executive director of the Independent Fiscal Office came out and he made a comment. And he said that the prior bill that was done on property tax elimination was fiscally sound, it would work. And the reason that that was significant is the property tax elimination bill was a holistic approach. Many things that Representative Isaacson made as a comment was right on the money. We found that in our analytics. Senator Williams, your comments were very appropriate. Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill, Representative Stilwell, the outcomes issue, all very much appropriate to bring up in those hearings. And what happened was it breathed life. And the group that you're sitting to my right and left and behind me came up and approached me and said, let's not kill it, let's see if we can fix it. So in 2021, I did a co-sponsorship memo. It was pretty unusual. And in the co-sponsorship memo, I said, please don't co-sponsor this bill. And I'm going to quote this one aspect. I said, currently there's a case before the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court concerning the fair funding in schools. It's virtually impossible to determine how a court will rule. However, Pennsylvania's education funding is so complex and archaic that a judicial decision would likely be reams of paper in the making, and I think that's pretty accurate. My replacement bill was equally as many reams of paper in the making. It's also very unlikely that the court would make a decision on how to fix it, but would remand it back to the legislature to do, and that's what obviously happened. The reason we wanted to make sure that we brought our testimony today to the table is our research has indicated a number of different factors. First of all, the school funding crisis took centuries to create. And I applaud you for all the work you're doing because, I forget who made the comment, Senator Williams, I think you said 5 years, or Senator Rothman, someone said 5 years to fix. It's going to take 5 years to 10 years to implement any change unless you're willing to sacrifice the soundness of the entire education system and perhaps the economy. The current rate of increase in school property taxes is absolutely unsustainable for a significant number of seniors. And candidly, I was stunned by the number of low-income families who approached me and said the same thing. So they said you have made home ownership unaffordable to us. The cost drivers in education, and I provided you a book. It's called Revolutionizing Accounting for Decision Making. I did it for a reason, because it talks about cost drivers. And in 2001, the accounting profession came to a realization that our principles were archaic, and we redid ourselves. And I am a CPA, by full disclosure. And you look at sunk costs versus others. So let me make a comment to you. The cost drivers of education include a PESER's contribution rate, which approximates 20% of a school district's funds. That does nothing to take care of an education of a child. It's a sunk cost. But you have to do it. It's a liability. Parental involvement or lack of involvement in a child's education is significant. Representative Isaacson, your comment was really appropriate. You're dealing with a lot of issues in Philadelphia. I've read all published financial statements, annual comprehensive financial reports for every school district in Pennsylvania. I can't wait for the movie to come out. The transfers in and out of a classroom during the course of an academic year, which is substantial in Philadelphia, Erie, Lebanon, Reading, Harrisburg, and other areas, Lancaster, are significant and disruptive. I'm not making a value judgment about why people move in or out of a district, but they do, and that's a cost driver over which a teacher can do nothing. They're the recipient of somebody else's actions. Mandates, either self-imposed or not. Needs of children with disability are a critical issue. And I mention this because the Federal IDEA Act has never met its statutory requirement of funding 40% of the required issue. And by way of full disclosure, I did a letter to the Department of Education in the United States. I asked the representatives to sign it. Every member who was a member of the House of Representatives at the time signed that letter. I had over 170 representatives sign the letter saying that the federal government needs to step up. That's a major cost driver. Facilities maintenance. I was on, I believe it's Channel 10 in Philadelphia, talking about the bill. And I named virtually all the schools in Philadelphia. And a reporter said to me on the site, said, how do you know this? I said, you can't make these decisions unless you're willing to get into that level of detail. Hold harmless agreements that you've obviously heard before. So I mentioned this because there's a number of other factors that I think people need to be very much aware of. First of all, when school districts merge as a hold harmless agreement, in case you're not aware, the PSERS pension liability is a liability of every single school district. There's no, in fact, I probably shouldn't mention a school district because they might say, is that school district in distress? And it wouldn't be. But if one of the larger school districts were to become insolvent and unable to pay its pension bills, after the state has its ability to seize funds, all that unfunded liability becomes a liability of all the remaining school districts. And that's already happened in Pennsylvania once in the past couple of years. And so you need to be aware that these are issues that require a very rational and realistic and total complete change to the way this process is done. The approach that we've used and come up with is a result of all of that research. But I want to finalize my comments by just saying, your efforts have been laudatory. I can't thank you enough. I can't think of a more difficult task for all of you. I will tell you, if you get it wrong, it will likely end up in court again. It'll be relitigated. If you get it wrong, children will get hurt. If you think it's going to be an easy fix, I guarantee you it won't be. If you think anyone's going to be happy by the result of your decisions, I can guarantee you absolutely not. They will not be. When I came out with my bill, I had over 5,000 hate emails. And when I took out the ones from my family, I answered those 10. And I answered every single email that was not a death threat. And in doing so, the second year I introduced it was an entirely different perspective. Your work is tremendous, it's needed to be done, and it requires that we look holistically at the economic structure of what's happened in Pennsylvania. Senator Miller, what you and Senator Rothman did about advancing some of these reforms are critical to get this done, and I thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Kistler.
Good morning. I want to thank the entire commission for allowing us to speak today. My name is Robert Kistler. I'm a retired product engineer in the semiconductor industry. What I am not is a polished public speaker. What I am is a voice for tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Pennsylvanians. Our group here is truly bipartisan. We're made up of all party affiliations, although there is about 60, I think. We make up 3. Our group has done a tremendous amount of analysis looking at this problem, because it's a very complex problem, as we all know. Our solution, we believe, will meet the court order biggest concerns, as well as provide a transition to a new form of funding. it's very important to consider cash flow. And as Mr. Representative Ryan stated, it's going to take 5 to 10 years to make that a change. And we believe that our bill does that effectively. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to digress for one slide only. This slide captures, I guess, what Senator Argel said is our worst in nation funding. The red line on this graph is the percent of real estate taxes of total revenue. As Mr. Stilwell indicated, it ranges from 6% to 80% and everything in between. It's truly irrational, if not discriminatory. The court order was absolutely correct in stating, in their opinion, that Pennsylvania has an over-reliance on local property taxes. And what's hideous about the taxing is hold harmless and the local property tax bases lock in that disparity. Even if you would vacate hold harmless, the difference in the local property tax bases do not allow you to ever equalize that. You could take the school districts in the lower left of that graph, the ones down in the teens and below, you could allow those school districts or have them increase to the Act 1 index every year, and they will never catch the other side of the schools. There's just no way that this system can help with your adequacy goals. Next slide, please. This slide, we did an impact of analysis, a back test of implementing our solution by looking back. So we started in school year 2015, 2016. If you look at the red columns, they are real estate tax revenue generated by the school by property taxes, and the green stack column is our solution. Okay. If you look for the first 5 years, our solution is pretty much in line with the revenue funding. The last couple years, though, our solution generates more revenue. The reason that is because of the sound economic policies of the bill simply leveraged economic growth. You're looking at as much as $7.7 billion that was left on the table. Next slide, please. This is just another way of looking at the data. It's a cumulative growth chart, but I want to point something out. It's very important. The chart is 100% accurate, and it's based on IFO data, their published data. What I did not realize is 2 days ago I wrote to the IFO and I said, why is there such a discrepancy or a disparity in 1920 revenue data compared to 2021? And the answer I got back explains that dip, because it's not real. And I'm going to read their response to me. They said approximately $1.3 billion was shifted from fiscal year 2019-20 to 2020-21 under the pandemic-related tax due dates. Most of it was personal income tax. So $1.3 billion was shifted to the following year, and that's why you see that dip. It's not real. Next slide, please. There's a lot of consternation about when the bill was first introduced about extending PIT to some retirement income, that being with the exception of Social Security or equivalents like railroad pension and military pensions. But let me assure you, and the IFO data shows it right here, that it is a financial windfall for seniors. If you look at the top table, it shows that seniors pay $3.34 billion in school property taxes. Under the potential property tax replacement revenues generated by the IFO, it shows that $1.49 billion would be paid by seniors by the PIT extension. That's nearly a $2 billion windfall. That's a win by any definition. Next slide, please. My last slide shows the historic tax rates of SUT and PIT since their inception. SUT has remained flat for 55 years, and PIT has not needed to be changed for 19 years. PIT and SUT money is collected, and that is funneled into the general fund. The state pays their portion of basic education from the general fund, as well as other budgetary needs. Yet, no tax raise was ever needed. Why is that? Because of the naturally occurring growth in wages and cost of products and services. So it's already stable enough to fund the state portion of funding schools. There's no reason it can't handle it all. And finally, next slide, please. I want to thank the commission again for giving us this opportunity for our voices to be heard. We trust you'll feel our plan is elegantly solves today's problems and tomorrow's revenue growth while also satisfying the court order, reducing the need for the court to revisit. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Turning to Representative Sturla for question.
Thank you. Could you get for me, you don't have it today, but can you get for me what your graphs look like if you include the time between 2000, say, like go back to 2005 and take us through 2010? Because in 2010, I believe it was, we cut $1 billion from education in the state of Pennsylvania. And part of the reason for that was because of the economic downturn that occurred. And because the state's revenues are based on sales tax and income tax, we were short. And when we cut $1 billion out of education, that meant we laid off 20,000 teachers. And at the time, the state was funding about 33% of the cost of education in the state, and the other 2/3 was being funded through local property taxes. So if the locals were dependent on sales and use tax also, my assumption is that they would have cut $2 billion out of education. And we wouldn't have laid off 20,000 teachers, we would have laid off 60,000 teachers. Can you show me, can you just, for the future, just give me a chart that shows 2010.
All right. Actually, I was going to do the study back further, but the IFO has their data archived practically before 2013. So yes, I'll just have to ask the IFO, how do I access that archived data? I think Mr. Ryan or Representative Ryan wants to add something here.
If I could, Representative Sturla, that's a great question. We had a financial rescue caucus in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives that Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill was a member of, and Dun & Bradstreet came in to speak, and I wanted to break a myth that exists. The sales tax and income tax are significantly more stable than people think it is. Not quite as stable as a property tax, but the Dun & Bradstreet showed, and it's on YouTube. If you type in Financial Rescue Caucus, you'll see it. And he specifically makes a comment. He said, this is the analyst from DNB. He said, I represent the liberal side. And he said, and I know you don't by looking at me. He said, I'm going to actually say something that's going to reinforce your point of view here. Because of the natural growth of good, sound economic policies, as an example, when Senator Williams asked the question about inflation, and inflation in pay automatically increases personal income tax. Same thing with sales tax. And so they showed the chart, and it was a very minor blip. The $1 billion, and because of that $1 billion issue that's become discussed more and more throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, whenever the federal government provides a stimulus, we saw it during COVID, we cautioned all of our school districts in Lebanon County, do not build that into your recurring base, because when you do and you lose it, you will end up being in a position of having to lay people off. And it's why I emphasize the issue in the testimony about cost drivers. The danger of not looking at what's actually driving the cost of education is what's going to lead us to make suboptimal decisions. One of the things that I often get concerned about is when I hear the term averages being used. I taught economics, and we would use the term marginal cost rather than average cost. The average cost per student is nowhere near the marginal cost. And so let me give you an example. If we add one more person to this hearing, there's no cost. If we take one person out, there's no change in cost. But if we were billing it as a tuition, then you would see, someone would say, well, that's $10,000 for that one person, when in fact that's not real. And so it's real important that we look at what happened during that period of time and do a deep soul search. Was there $1 billion that came from the federal government that then got built into the base? Our bill specifically eliminates, on another issue that's important, specifically eliminates the cash reserve balance limitations in Pennsylvania. What we say is every school district should be run as a business. Every school district should be able to have the type of funds necessary for long-term sustainable growth, because so much of a school district's costs are fixed costs that don't go away if you do it, or you will be faced with that $20,000. That's a testimony to a poorly designed cost structure when you have to start laying people off because of something like that happening, and why I applaud you for the efforts you're undertaking.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate your comments about the reserves. Mr. Stilwell, you talked about how from the court ruling, page 769, it says it's evident to the court that the current system of funding public education has disproportionately negatively impacted students who attend schools in low wealth school districts. This disparity is a result of the funding system that is heavily dependent on local tax revenue, which benefits students of high wealth districts. And then you say, to prove that, you point out that the Duquesne School District only pays 6%, and Lower Merion pays 81%. But Duquesne is the poor school district, and Lower Merion is the wealthy district. And my guess is that if you looked at 1 mil of what 1 mil raises in taxes in Lower Merion versus what 1 mil raises in Duquesne, the numbers are even more disparate, which is why we're trying to, like, Duquesne should be paying 1% or 2%, and Lower Merion should be paying 90% if you wanted to balance things. Because otherwise, the state funding going into those things, it's going to have to be even more drastic.
Well, I would agree with that. Thank you for that comment. Okay. I think it's good to look perhaps at the cost of education per student in those two districts as well. I'm sure that Lower Merion has a much higher expenditure per student than Duquesne City. So the disparity is even more stark.
So are you suggesting that they shouldn't be allowed to spend that money?
Under this current situation, of course they should be allowed to spend it.
Okay, if we adopted your situation, should they be allowed to spend it if they can raise it locally?
Well, today they are allowed to spend it.
Okay.
I mean, there's no restriction on that.
Right.
As long as the taxpayers are willing to accept the tax increases to make the revenue available.
Okay. So, but how do I fund the poor district? Which no matter, like in Duquesne, I can tax income and I don't generate anything. And I can tax sales and I don't gain anything.
The property taxes in Duquesne City, I'm sure, are quite small. I could look those numbers up. Yes, you're right. You can tax all you want there, but right now they're funded by the state. Almost 90% or more of their funding comes from the state.
Right.
My question is, why doesn't 90% of the funding in my own school district come from the state so that I can reduce my own school property tax? It's just unfair.
Because your tax millage is lower than Duquesne's.
Well, I don't know that I can't
Well,
confirm. I can't confirm or deny that.
I can tell you as a general rule, the poor districts have a higher tax millage rate than the wealthy districts, even though the poor district is only getting 6% of its money from local taxes, and the wealthy district's getting 81% of its money from local taxes, because 1 mil in Lower Merion generates a boatload of money, and 1 mil in Duquesne generates nothing. And that's why there is that disparity in how what share local funds are, and the disparity in terms, like, your things they should cross at even sharper angles as far as.
And my argument, Representative Sturla, is that you can't fix that.
Why not?
Okay, you can't fix it with property taxes. You cannot
I
make the
can-
property tax revenue the same in Lower Merion as it is in Duquesne City.
Right.
So
I don't intend
it's
to.
irretrievably broken, in my opinion, and we should replace it.
But, so you want to replace it with a system that taxes the same in every district?
I want to tax it from,
Income and
And
sales.
which
the
are
same-
universally
the s-
paid by the populace.
The same in every district? As a percentage rate?
Well, it will be, but in the poorer districts, the presumption is that they will earn less and therefore spend less, and therefore the revenue from those taxes will be less.
And so they have less money to spend on a school district?
No, if I may.
Yes.
Okay.
I spent a great deal of time writing that bill. It's over 300 and some pages. The money that's currently allocated by the state with the education would remain as such, allocated by the formula that you've seen in my testimony, which is that information I received from the Department of Education of how the basic education funding is allocated. So the funds, if a school district is getting 90% of the funds from the state now, it would continue to get that. This shift away from the property taxes does a number of things. There's not an issue of millage anymore because there will be no property taxes. What it's done is made up from an income and a sales tax, but it's expanding the income tax base to those individuals that might be seniors because we have an in-migration and an out-migration problem right now. One of the things that occurs is seniors are moving into the state. We're representing the senior group because we don't tax retirement income. Younger people are out migration. That's happening extensively in Philadelphia County, where there's an out migration, and yet in the hold harmless districts in Pennsylvania, they're moving from the western part of the state and the northern part of the state down into the Philadelphia and the south central Pennsylvania area. Senator Rothman's district is one of the fastest growing in the Commonwealth. Senator Christopher Phillips-Hill is one of the others. So what happens is what we're saying is the way we're funding it with the sales tax, the way a poor school district benefits is the sales tax that gets collected, as an example from the Wayfair decision, gets allocated on a per pupil basis from the statewide funds that come in. It gets sent back out to the school district. That's not something that currently happens as a result of the increase we'd have in the sales tax. So you would see almost a significant increase in the funding. We estimate, it's been a year and a half since I've done it, so I would ask you not to quote me on it, and I can redo the numbers. But in year one of us doing this, Philadelphia County gets approximately $300 million more in the basic education funding.
So when I see the chart here that says that it's 1.8% in local PIT and 2% in local sales tax, you're saying that that would actually get collected at a state level and redistributed?
Well, it's all sales tax are collected at state level, but as an example, what would happen is if the sales tax, there's two separate things. If the sales tax in Philadelphia County is collected in Philadelphia, it's going directly to Philadelphia County.
Okay.
Same thing in Lancaster County, which is the area you represent.
Yeah, but there's 16 school districts in my county, so who's it get distributed
It
to?
gets, and this is one of the things I found is under the Pennsylvania, the way Pennsylvania used to fund the school districts, it was funded by county. And that mechanism still exists. So the money would go to the county and it's allocated on a per pupil basis to all the students within that county.
Based on the weight of the students or just sheer strict numbers?
Strict numbers. And as an example, in Lancaster County, you have one school district that goes into two counties.
Yeah.
And that would be based upon the census of the students in both. That mechanism's already set up and we could go to the county and immediately distributed to the school districts.
Okay, so my one school district, which has a weight 2 times higher than the other school district, would just get the same amount as the other school district?
Same amount per pupil.
Per pupil, okay.
So if it has twice the number of students, it would get twice the amount of money.
Okay, one final question. The state of Michigan, a few years back, eliminated local property taxes and then came back within less than a year and implemented a state property tax. There has been no other state in the nation that I know of that has eliminated local property taxes. Can you give me an example of any state in the nation that has eliminated local property taxes?
No, but let me explain. I specialize in keeping companies and organizations out of bankruptcy. It's also a little bit about what I did in the military as a commander of the civil affairs group. And what I would mention to you is that's why we designed our bill the way we did. Michigan did it. It was unsound to do it the way they did it. It was irresponsible, in my humble opinion. So what we do is we allow for a 3-year hold harmless. We create an equivalent of an FDIC for school districts, for which there, is it 1/4%? I think it's 1/4%. Gets allocated from each school district's budget to go to this equivalent, in the school district's own name, will get funded into that type of a program that is a borrowing base. If the school district runs short of funds and they don't have enough reserves, they can go to that with the Department of Education's blessing. You would immediately then have assigned someone that's been trained by PASBO or its equivalent in how to do workouts and restructurings to make sure the school district has got enough financial reserves. Additionally, on the day of transition of this bill, because property taxes are collected a year in advance, in case people are not aware of that, they're collected 12 months in advance. So what would happen is on the day this bill goes into effect, your escrow for your homes would terminate because you no longer have a property tax. You would have an escrow for your local county taxes, but you wouldn't for your school district tax. The income tax would increase that same day, and then the school district would get paid those funds for that school, for the school property taxes, which would, according to the Independent Fiscal Office, give the school districts about an $8 billion cash cushion to operate from over the 12-month period of time of the transition.
So we're doing both taxing systems for a 12-month period?
No, what happens is because of the nature, we just had that discussion the other day. We already have done that. So let me give you an example. If you're a homeowner, you've paid your property taxes a year in advance, but you're escrowing them a year in advance. So you're actually paying your school property taxes 2 years in advance. And this is basically eliminating 1 year of that and providing the school districts that cash funds that they need to transition, because it will take a while for those funds to start naturally coming through. I've looked at this. This is a multivariate expression with variables that are probably in the neighborhood of hundreds. I've war gamed virtually every school district, including the hold harmless school districts, to determine what would happen. And that's why I said it's going to take a minimum of 3 years. And then you have to have this FDIC bank becomes a lender of last resort. So school districts are not put in that position of saying, I can't operate this coming year. It's designed to give stability to the school districts and protection to all the taxpayers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Turning next to Senator Rothman.
Thank you, gentlemen, and specifically Colonel Ryan, who many years ago, not only did I have the honor of serving with, along with then Representative Kristen Phillips-Hill and the House Representatives, but we all sat in the same area. So I appreciated your courage then and your wisdom and sagacity, and you were a little bit of a dark being talking about the coming fiscal crisis, and it turned out to be you were right. And I didn't support eliminating property taxes then. I do, after reading the entire Commonwealth Court ruling, believe that there's no way we are ever going to have fairness if certain districts are able to fund more than others, and real estate is clearly that way. I agree with you, having spent over 30 years in real estate, that the income and sales tax are probably more consistent. We just have a little bit of a lag. We're going to see property assessments go down because people are appealing their property taxes when it comes to certain segments of the market that are currently are in decline, including the office market. I need to note, because we talked about millage rates, each county, each of our 67 counties, has a different assessment rate because of when they do their assessment. So millage rates may not mean anything at all. If you haven't had, if one county recently reassessed, their millage rates are going to be lower. Another county hadn't, like Dauphin or Cumberland, haven't done a reassessment in 20 years. Obviously, the millage rates need to be higher. So I am a convert. Thank you, Colonel Ryan, for that. But I'm concerned about how we're going to replace it. And I think Chairman Sturla mentioned this. Is any of these, this chart, or any of these buckets going directly to the legislature and the Commonwealth for us to then distribute to the school districts that may not have as much. And I think this was pointed out, there are going to be areas like my school districts. And by the way, we're joined by a longtime superintendent at Cumberland Valley, Fred Witham, Dr. Witham, my old friend. Cumberland Valley receives 75% of their budget from local property taxes. Of these buckets, which would stay in the county, I think you touched upon it a little bit, but how much would go to the legislature for us to then send out in a formula? Because I think ultimately that's going to be what I believe is going to be the only thing that's fair, is that we start giving out per pupil the same amounts and let the school districts deal with the same amounts rather than allow some school districts to have more.
I would encourage trying to cure one problem at a time, because if you don't, we have a few people on the end of the table that we might all be more hair impaired than we have been in the past, and I apologize. I would suggest that the vast majority of the funds are kept locally, with the exception of the wayfare tax, which is collected at the state level, would go out. This is designed to be a replacement tax of the property taxes, which is over $15 billion. And as Mr. Kistler brought up so appropriately, and Mr. Stilwell brought up, in their, one in the charts and the other in the testimony, the funding would continue from the state with the existing funds the way it currently is being done. While this is transitioning into a more economic basis, the vast majority of more funds would stay within those counties. As an example, in the case of Philadelphia, Philadelphia's 2%, that 2% sales tax would remain in Philadelphia. So when I go into inner city Philadelphia and have dinner, that increase in 2% would end up staying in Philadelphia. I deliberately did it because one of the things that I found in all of my research is people didn't trust it going to the state to be reallocated out. I also found that people didn't trust a reduction of property taxes because of what happened with the gaming. Many people were told gaming was going to get rid of property taxes. And what I'm hearing people say across the board is, deceive me once, shame on you, deceive me twice, shame on me. And so I found almost no support for partial elimination. I did get grief about the, as you can tell, by the taxation on property tax, on income taxes for seniors. And that's how Bob and I became very good friends. He was very much opposed to the bill. And we sat down, we really talked about it, and a Ryan Pertuzio came up with a tax calculator. It's called noprop.tax. Noprop.tax, thank you. The internet, I didn't invent it until the late 80s, and so I don't always remember all those details. Noprop.tax, but when he did that, all people all of a sudden sat down and said, oh my God, I'm going to save this much money. We already knew, according to the IFO, that there would be a reduction. So to answer your question specifically, any of the 1.85% increase in personal income tax goes directly to the school district in which you reside.
So, I do remember 1986, and then Governor Casey trying to get rid of local property taxes. Yes. So it's been a long time coming.
And I learned from some of what he had gone through, because that's pretty clearly known about, because he had a good idea.
So would school district debt, and my last question, Madam Chairman, how about capital debt? Would that be able, there've been iterations where a school district could have real estate tax on debt? And the last question, I think we had some from the business community here before. Are we talking about eliminating property taxes on all real estate or just residential owner-occupied real estate?
Let me answer the first question first. All school property tax debt that exists currently, and that's why I included a sample loan document from the financial markets. Every school district in Pennsylvania that takes on debt pledges future millage increases to pay off the debt. And contrary to popular belief, the debt that a school district absorbs is ultimately guaranteed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and has to be paid in the event of a default. This issue means, the way we structured it, 100% of the property tax goes away, and there's no ability to put an increase in tax on to take on more debt for school district. That would have to be worked out with the Department of Education and the cash reserves. And it's one of the reasons we've allowed for the elimination of cash reserve balances, to allow the superintendent to have the control over the spending they need so they can do a 3, 5, and 10-year plan for their school district, because they're getting the kind of data that allows them to make those kinds of demographic analytics. The PDE already knows the school districts that are suffering in terms of those that are distressed. And this system also requires that school business officials get a degree of certification of capabilities to make sure they're capable of managing the funds of the school district. The second aspect of your question was about always all property taxes go away, including for corporations.
Thank you, Senator. Turning next to Deputy Secretary Delgado.
Thank
for a
you.
question.
One question that I have is that we've discussed it's going to take several years to try to fix this problem that we have. And in your solution, you have a one-time cash infusion of only 75% of the property tax. Why is that? And why only 75%?
Because what happens is the school property taxes are typically paid, with the exception of one school district in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. The fiscal year end is June 3rd, or the tax bill goes out effective July 1st, but it's typically not paid until September. So if it's paid in September, 3 months of that would have already been earned. That's why I mentioned to Representative Stilwell that it's not it drops off immediately on day one. So that 75% is 75% of the money that comes in for the school taxes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And then my other question is, have you done the calculation to see if the 2% will actually cover what we're currently receiving from the property taxes?
We did. In fact, so did the Independent Fiscal Office, and that's why we included in our testimony that it was in year one, there's almost a dollar for dollar replacement, and that's why Mr. Kistler's slide shows you in future years, due to natural economic growth, you'd actually get more money from the income tax and the sales tax than you would. And I want to be clear with everybody. Anyone who is, as an example, is an Act 9, pre-Act 9 teacher that didn't get Social Security, they would not pay any tax on their retirement income. Social Security is not taxed under this bill. Police officer pensions are not taxed because they don't get Social Security. Railroad workers, postal workers, they don't get Social Security. So if you don't, civil servants that don't get Social Security would not be taxed on their Social Security income, and there would be an offset. If any money that you've already put into a pension plan would not be taxed. If you don't know that number, the bill provides for a 15% reduction of your estimated retirement. And so to answer your question, I've looked at this every conceivable way it can, and this provides for substantial growth in funds available to school districts after the year of implementation due to the natural growth of the Commonwealth. And that's why the economic growth and policies supporting economic growth are so important to this bill. And Representative Isaacson, may I answer one of the questions Representative Isaacson asked, because it's a really important question. One of the things that I think we have to recognize, school districts, as you all know, are a microcosm of the community. So if there's a problem in the community, and there's be it drug issues or ADHD issues or other types of issues, those are issues that are real cost. And what happens in Pennsylvania is when those school districts are dealing with those issues, I contend that those costs should be covered by the Department of Health and not by the Department of Education. And that's why I gave you the book. If I were doing it from a holistic cost perspective, I'd be reallocating the dollars from the other departments to cover those, what would be deemed to be not necessarily what people my age would have said would have typically been within the purview of a school.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary. Turning next to Representative Isaacson. Although your question may have been answered.
Oh, no. Well, I appreciate this discussion. I am from Philadelphia, and we are a county-based school system. There, as opposed to Representative Sturla, who pointed out how many school districts are in his county, we have one. So all this discussion, and so the allocation is a whole lot different. But going to how your schools will be funded, let's start with increasing the PIT. Not that I'm necessarily against that. I actually, I would be, and I'll state it publicly, I'll put up that vote. But also remember, everybody in Philadelphia pays a wage tax. So I don't want you necessarily driving people out of Philadelphia, where actually we have increased our population. That's why we got another representative seat in Philadelphia in a reapportionment. But the local sales tax in Philadelphia is already 2% higher than the rest of you. So while I appreciate you're going to come in and pay a sales tax on having a drink or going to a restaurant, and please feel free to do so, the residents of Philadelphia, to buy and purchase things, you're just increasing that, especially on seniors. It's a regressive tax already. That's why I'm more inclined to say that we should be increasing wage tax than I would say to increase a sales tax. And in our county-based education system, the nice thing is that my residents in my district pay very high property tax, extremely high property tax, and they pay it, and I very rarely hear anybody say anything to me about it, because they understand that in other areas of the city where we would have issues that have been brought up certainly in depth in your testimony, and thank you, former Representative Ryan, for recognizing all that. We understand we pay that extra property tax so that we take care of those who cannot, because in the county education system, that's what you do. You don't sit and say, well, too bad. If I can afford it and I can afford that house, then I pay that because we want to educate everybody in society. And then the only other thing, again, with the local sales tax increase, we've been all experiencing, every senior to every young person in college, inflation. And when you're taking and adding another 2%, in Philadelphia, you'd be bringing us up, what, to 10%? That's
correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Allegheny County would be 9%. Philadelphia County would be 10.
Again, 10% sales tax you want to bring my county up to. So it's a little bit difficult when I understand the issues with property tax and how some may feel about them in smaller school districts. I've just explained to you how it works in a county-based system, and perhaps that's what needs to be done so everybody can support each other to keep prices down. But this proposal, again, I have a very hard time with the thought of trying to tell the people in Philadelphia, from seniors to young people, that you're going to start slapping them with a 10% sales tax, so other people don't have to pay property tax.
If I could, because I think this is particularly important, specifically, Philadelphia County would benefit almost immediately, as I said, in the neighborhood. It's a couple years old now, about $300 million. But I would also mention for you this. When this issue became so complex, the one thing I became convinced of, the probability of everyone being happy with the proposal is probably zero. And so I tried to find an optimal solution rather than a maximum solution. But if I might make a comment to you, as an example, the sales tax. If someone's is below the poverty line and they're using an access card, they're not charged sales tax now, and they won't be under this bill. So that's exempt. Seniors, if they are on an access card, would be exempt. I tried to make, because my faith aspect of me, which I've gone back into, since I've left the legislature, is tell me that kind of thing is really important. But a person who's making $5 million a year in Wall Street is going to be paying that difference of 1.95% or 1.85% on that income. So as an example, when I designed this bill, I actually paid more in income tax than I'm saving in property taxes. And so when our group, Ryan Pertuzio in particular, came out with no prop.tax, I would encourage anyone to sit down and take a look at it, because I think you'll see that, God bless you, that one of the things that we found is that sales taxes are relatively inelastic up to a point, right? But beyond that, they're elastic. So generally speaking, people were able to pay it and recognize the difference. There would be some people that might benefit more than others, but I think you'll find that 80% of seniors benefit, the vast majority of lower income people benefit. The school funding definitely benefits through natural economic growth. And so I would just encourage you, and we can do the pro formas. Fortunately, we passed a bill that gave the Independent Fiscal Office the ability, it was a bill I had done, on dynamic scoring. So even on this would allow a dynamic score. And I think I'd love to sit down with you and work through the numbers, because in this case, Philadelphia County actually does better. Now, would there be individuals in particular that might not be as better off? I'd be disingenuous if I said other than that, sure. I'm going to pay, I've just downsized because of the fact that I'm a senior, and I will now pay substantially more under my bill than I would have before. And I'm okay with doing that because I think it's more equitable and it represents a standard perception of income. And what we told everybody, if you're one life event away, if I said to my wife, if I die, will you still feel the same way about property taxes? And the reason I say that is because one of our social securities goes away, the military pension gets cut by 55 or 45%, and the like. And so when we started phrasing it, I know Bob and I had that discussion when we were going through it. People are one life event away from losing their home. Additionally, Philadelphia has always been known as a neighborhood community. I did a lot of work with companies that were brought in by the city to tear down abandoned homes. It would be wonderful to make the dream of home ownership available again to poorer families that could own the home. And I worry the fact that we don't, that's perhaps some of the problem, and I can't say this is a hypothesis, that perhaps some of the problems that we have is that we've denied home ownership. The Hispanic community reached out to me saying that this bill makes sense for us. Go to closing and watch how much money you have to put out on your first closing for your paying your property taxes a year in advance.
Thank you. I don't want to, I could go into a whole different venue down that, but I'm not going to, because I see that we are at our time limit, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. And last but certainly not least, Representative Topper.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for testifying, gentlemen, and Representative Ryan. It's good to see you again. And I always considered you in the House my go-to on tax policy, because I'm certainly not an expert, which has been reinforced by the fact that I've read the title of your book 5 times and I still don't know what it's about. So I'm gonna take that as I still need some growth in that direction. If we do talk a little bit about regionalization of services or expanding a property tax base, and I know the bill focuses on elimination, but I know you've also studied this issue tremendously. So the only question I have is there any scenario where spreading out a tax base makes it either, I don't want to use the word equitable, but simply makes it a better system? So in other words, I represent 10 school districts. So if I have Bedford and I have Everett and I have Northern Bedford and Tussey Mountain, I have Chestnut Ridge, and they're all different tax bases, but I made them one tax base, one school district. The schools stayed. There was still Tussey Mountain, there was still NBC, there was still Chestnut Ridge, but now the tax base was spread throughout the county. Have in any of your studies, does that show to be similar to Maryland's system? Does that show it to be better, or are we still going to come back to the same problems that we face under the current system?
Bob, did you want to answer this? No. First of all, thank you very much. There are cost drivers, so spreading it out could have some impact on cost. But my personal opinion, having been in the classroom and having been on the Board of Trustees of a university, the issue relates to the socioeconomic factors of what's going on in the base that you have. If the teachers, that's why I've always been concerned about teacher proficiency markings, when in fact a lot of that responsibility is something that's been going on with parents. I mean, if the parents are not engaged, it becomes really difficult for a teacher to make up for that in the process. So I would know in your districts, I would say yes, expanding it and spreading out would have a beneficial effect. You'd reduce some of the redundancies. You'd have better purchasing power. I was on the Board of Trustees of a major hospital system. We had over 20 hospitals nationwide. We went to a consolidated purchasing system. That significantly reduced costs. Those kinds of things can have benefits. But when you have 20% of your budget coming from PESers, you know, if I had a perfect world, I'd say the years that the legislature and the executive branch didn't fund the PESers contribution, might that be a way to perhaps accommodate some of this issue?
Okay. All right, because I think there's also the collection, the costs are different, but also the collection points. So, you know, even in Bedford County, you know, a house in Bedford Borough is going to be significantly different than the same size house cost or land cost in Fishertown, and trying to get that more spread out amongst the county. I'm just not sure, because again, I'm not an expert in the tax collection field either, as to whether that would, in other words, whether that would lower, if spreading it out would actually lower the property tax burden throughout the county.
I would say it's not significantly enough of a cost driver that it would have a material impact.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Argyle.
Thank you, Senator. I think many of us have a lot of scars from this issue. It's nasty, it's complex, it's not just partisan, it's a regional issue. When we attempted to bring Senate Bill 76 to the floor of the Senate years ago, didn't get one vote out of Philly, one vote out of Pittsburgh, and we didn't do all that well with some of the rural areas either. And so I guess my question is, if knowing, as many of you do, the realities of the House and Senate, what one recommendation would you like to see us make that has a realistic chance of becoming law in Pennsylvania in the near term? One recommendation.
I would wholeheartedly encourage you to pass this bill. And the reason I say that, it is a holistic approach that requires statespersons to do, but if we fail to do it, I will merely give you a couple quick statistics. In 1920, Pennsylvania had 36 congresspersons. We don't now. We're down to 17. Pennsylvania was a growing state. It's not now. We lost the railroad industry. I came out of the steel industry. I worked at Lucan Steel. Most of the steel companies are gone or severely diminished in size or have gone overseas. The coal industry speaks for itself. I would encourage us, if we wish to eliminate blight and provide opportunities for our children, so some of the best schools in the United States are in Pennsylvania, but we're educating our children so that they can move to other states to get jobs. We need to reverse that, and this requires a holistic approach. This bill was designed to tackle an elephant in the room, and you and I both have the scars to prove how difficult of an issue it is. And just as a comment, if I can make, this bill also provides that renters' incomes, a renter's monthly rent would be reduced by the amount of property taxes saved. So all renters would benefit from this issue as well. And that's, so there's no one that's going to sit this and say, I'm really happy about this. But I will tell you, 2 years, 3 years from now, you'll be seeing a significant economic growth spurt. If we failed to do it, you'll be having the same battle 5 years from now, and the Commonwealth Court will see the court cases coming back up again.
Thank you.
Do you see any way that we can do it step by step, incrementally, rather than all at once?
The bill, the way it's designed in itself, is actually step by step. It's done like pulling the Band-Aid off, but it provides a 3-year hold harmless agreement that the state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, would put $500 million in its lender of last resort that allows for a transition should there be a shortage of funds available for the basic education funding formula.
Thank you. I understand in the interest of time, we're over, and so I do appreciate this.
Senator, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Representative Sturla, quick question.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up because when Senator Rothman was talking about who gets the property tax eliminated, you said corporations do also. We heard testimony earlier today that 41% share of the property taxes collected today are paid by commercial properties. They don't pay income tax and very little sales tax in a lot of cases. Does that mean that the people that are going to pay the income tax now are making up that additional 41%?
I would like to see the data source for the 41%.
Thank you. I just have to say thank you so much for being here today. Your testimony was extremely helpful. This has sort of been the elephant in the room that we've needed to have this conversation, and I'm so glad that you were here today to provide us this opportunity to have this conversation. Gentlemen, thank you all very, very much. Before we adjourn, we would like to put a vote before the members with regard to the extension of the deadline for the Commission's report to be completed. Currently, it is due November 30th of 2023, and I would like to move that we extend that date until January 11th of 2024. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Representative Sturla. Ms. Wilkin, if you could please call the vote.
Argel,
Aye.
Delago,
Aye.
Fitterer,
Aye.
Hughes,
Aye.
Isaacson, Krug,
Aye.
Miller, Ortitai,
Aye.
Phillips-Hill,
Aye.
Rothman, Schweier,
Proxy, aye.
Sturla,
Aye.
Topper,
Aye.
Warner, Williams.
Aye.
With a unanimous vote, the report deadline has been extended to January 11th of 2023. I want to thank you all very much for that. We have a few more hearings to receive testimony, and I don't believe it would have allowed us the time we need to do a thoughtful report. Again, I would like to thank today's testifiers as well as all of the staff who helped facilitate this hearing here at Central Penn College. Also would like to note that included in today's packets is testimony from the Reason Foundation, who could not be here to testify in person. That testimony will be included in the record and will be available for everyone to see on the Commission's website. Our next Commission meeting will be on Thursday, November 9th in Bedford. And again, all information, including testimony provided today, can be found on the Commission's website, and that is basiceducationfundingcommission.com. All comments that are submitted through the website are made publicly available and will be part of the Commission's report. And with that, the Commission will stand in recess until the call of the chairs. Thank you very much.